Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos. Today's adventure: what if Harry and Hermione were the last heirs of both House Black and House Peverell? Before we dive in, if you haven't already, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The Ink That Remembers. Number 12. Grimmauld Place had spent a decade learning to be a tomb, and it was not enjoying the correction. Sunlight came through the tall drawing room windows in 3 long panels, and where it fell the dust gave up. Curtains that had hung like scabs for years were gone, taken down and burned in the garden 2 nights before, while Sirius laughed and Creature wept, and neither of them would say why. Now the walls showed their old green damask, faded to the color of pond water, and the great black chandelier had been lowered on its chain and stripped of cobweb until the crystals threw small coins of light across the ceiling. The house resisted in the way old houses do. A stair would groan under no foot at all. A door old that morning would sulk shut, but the light kept coming, and the light was winning, and that was the thing worth watching this summer. Harry sat on the arm of a sofa that no longer smelled of rot, turning a piece of toast in his fingers without eating it. He had grown into his height over the past year and had not yet grown used to it, so that he still expected door frames to be taller and chairs to be closer. His glasses were mended at one hinge with a coil of copper wire he had done himself badly and refused to let Hermione fix, because a thing you mended yourself was a thing that was yours. He watched the dust surrender in the light and felt the particular ease of a morning with nothing owed to it. "You're going to hold that toast until it apologizes," Hermione said. She was cross-legged in the window seat with 3 books open around her like a fan and a 4th in her lap, and the sun found the brown of her hair and made it warmer than it had any right to be. She had been reading Nature's Nobility, a wizarding genealogy since before he came down, which meant since before dawn, because she believed that a house you were living in owed you its history, and she intended to collect the debt. "It insulted my mother," Harry said. "I'm making it think about what it did. Your mother would have eaten it 20 minutes ago and been kind about it." She did not look up. "There's a whole page here on the Blacks. Did you know they had a family motto? Tauger's Pur," he said. "Sirius says it means stuck up forever. It means always pure." She turned the book so he could see the tree printed across 2 pages, a black lattice of names knotted with gold, and where the gold ran thin the names had been scratched out by hand, little scorched holes in the paper where someone had touched each one with a wand tip and named it unwelcome. Look how many they burned off, every marriage they didn't approve of, every daughter who ran. They spent 300 years deciding who counted, and the deciding is the only thing that outlived them. Harry came to stand behind her and looked at the tree, at the constellations of dead relations, the Blacks who had named their children after stars, claiming the whole sky for a family business. Sirius, Regulus, Bellatrix, Andromeda, with a burn where her line should continue. He found near the bottom a clean gap that felt like his own name deciding whether to arrive. "Cheerful lot," he said. "They were monstrous," Hermione said, in the level voice she used for facts she had already finished being angry about. "But they wrote everything down. That's the thing about people who think blood is destiny. They keep records like scripture. If you ever want to know exactly how the powerful lie to themselves, read what they save." The door opened without sulking, which meant Sirius, who had a way of moving through the house that made it briefly forget its grudges. He was thinner than the photographs Harry had grown up imagining and broader than the fugitive he had first met, a man reassembling himself out of 2 years of daylight and decent food. The gauntness had gone out of his face and left something sharper and kinder behind. He wore a dueling coat that had been his father's, taken in at the shoulders, and he had clearly noticed the 2 of them studying the family tree because his mouth did something complicated. "Ah," he said, reading the obituaries. "Your ancestors," Hermione said. "My ancestors," Sirius agreed, "would have had you scrubbed off the front step, Hermione, and me stuffed and mounted next to Great Uncle Cygnus. I keep the tapestry up so I remember what winning looks like. It looks like the last Black in the line being a blood traitor who let a Muggle-born read his family's dirty laundry in the good light." He dropped into a chair with the ease of a man who owned very little and had decided the little was enough. "Which is, coincidentally, why I want to take you to Gringotts today." Harry turned. "Both of us. You mostly, Hermione, because trying to leave her behind is more trouble than it's worth, and I've watched you attempt it." Sirius laced his fingers behind his head. "Here's the shape of it, pup. I'm the last Black. When I die, don't make that face. Everyone dies. Most people just have the manners to schedule it. The house goes somewhere. There are cousins who take it." Malfoy's sniffing at the vault door. "And there's a rule older than the Ministry that says a lord of an ancient house can name his heir by blood and intent while he's still breathing, and if he does it properly, the house can't be argued out of his hands after. I want to name you today so that when I'm gone it isn't a fight, it's a fact." The room did a small thing with its quiet. The dust hung in the light. "Sirius," Harry said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't." Sirius's voice stayed easy, but his eyes did not. "That's what makes it worth doing. Your father was as good as my brother, and you're the nearest thing to a son I'll get, and I would rather hand you a thing that's yours than leave you a war. Let an old dog do one tidy thing before he forgets how." He stood, and the ease came back over him like a coat. Besides, the goblins do a blood rite for it, very solemn, lots of chanting. You'll hate every second, bring your friend, she'll love the paperwork. Hermione had already closed her book on one finger to keep the place. The train of thought that would end 8 centuries later underground had begun, in a room full of light, over cold toast, and none of them heard it start. Gringotts in high summer was cold the way a cave is cold, a temperature that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with depth. The marble hall swallowed the noise of the street the moment the brass doors closed behind them, and the tellers on their high stools bent to their scales and their scrolls and did not look up, because a goblin who looked up at every wizard who entered would spend his whole life with his chin in the air, and goblins had opinions about wizards that were better expressed with the top of the head. Sirius gave his name to the nearest teller, and something moved through the hall. It was not loud. A pen paused. A second teller lifted his head after all a fraction and looked not at Sirius but at Harry, and then at Hermione, and then back to his ledger with the deliberate blankness of someone who has decided not to have seen a thing. Harry noticed because Hermione's hand had found his sleeve, 2 fingers, the smallest pressure, which was how she said look without moving her mouth. "They know you're coming," she murmured. "Sirius owled ahead. Sirius owled ahead about you." That one looked at me. Her eyes moved across the hall, cataloging in the manner she had of turning any room into a problem she could solve. "That's wrong, I'm nobody here, I don't have a vault, there's no reason for a Gringotts teller to have an opinion about my face. Maybe you have a very opinionable face. I have an extremely opinionable face and it's never once earned me a second look in a bank." She said it lightly, but the 2 fingers stayed on his sleeve. A goblin came for them who was not a teller. He was old in a way that went past age into geology, his skin the color of tarnished silver, his eyes set deep enough that the light gave up before it reached them. He wore no gold, and this, Harry would understand later, was the point. The goblins who wore gold handled coins, and the goblins who handled the things older than coins wore nothing at all because you did not decorate a keyhole. "Lord Black," the goblin said. His voice came up from somewhere lower than his chest. "I am Gornuk of the Rite Keepers. You have requested an investiture of heir. The vault of records is prepared. Your witnesses may attend." His gaze crossed Harry, measuring unhurried, and moved to Hermione, and there it stopped and stayed a beat too long. "The girl also." "The girl has a name," Sirius said, pleasant as a knife laid on a table. "She has several," Gornuk said. "That is the difficulty." He turned and walked, and there was nothing to do but follow him down out of the light. The cart ran deeper than Harry had ever gone, past the dragon on its chain, whose blindness he did not look at twice, past a black lake that gave the torchlight back wrong so that the reflections were a half-second late. The air grew mineral and still, and the walls stopped being carved and started being merely old, tunnels that had been widened by water before any goblin thought to claim them. At last the cart stopped at a landing where there was no vault door at all, only an archway cut in living rock, and beyond it a round chamber lit by a light that came from no lamp Harry could find. "The Hall of Blood and Ink," Gornuk said, and stood aside. The chamber was a library that had forgotten it was a library. Shelves rose out of sight into a dark that swallowed the top of the room, and on the shelves were not books but ledgers, iron-cornered, chained, each one thick as a paving stone. In the center stood a plain stone table, and set into the table was a shallow basin of some pale metal, and beside the basin lay a quill made of something that was not a feather, gray and fine and slightly luminous, as though a fish bone had been taught to write. The whole place smelled of iron and cold candle smoke, and underneath that something green, the smell a stone keeps when it has been underground with growing things a very long time. "This is where the houses are kept," Hermione breathed, and it was not a question, and for once she had nothing sharp to say. She had gone very still in the doorway with the light on her face. "This is where the houses are proven," Gornuk corrected. "Kept is a wizard's word. It supposes the house would leave. Houses do not leave, they wait." He crossed to the table and set his palm flat on the stone, and somewhere far up in the dark a ledger stirred on its chain with a sound like a sleeping animal turning. "Lord Black, the rite is simple in its shape and old in its meaning. You will give the basin your blood freely and name your heir. The heir gives blood in turn. The record makes itself. What the record writes cannot be unwritten and cannot be lied to and cannot be flattered. Do you understand what you are asking to be made permanent?" "I've made worse decisions with less ceremony," Sirius said. "That," Gornuk said, "is why we keep the ceremony." Sirius rolled back his sleeve. There was a thin silver blade beside the quill, no longer than a finger, and he drew it across the meat of his thumb without flinching, the way a man does a thing he has done before in worse rooms. 3 drops fell into the basin. The pale metal drank them and did not stay red. The blood spread across the bottom of the basin and turned the dark blue-black of ink and began very faintly to move, the way still water moves when something deep beneath it swims. "I, Sirius Orion Black, lord of the ancient and most noble house of Black, being of sound mind and stubborn blood," he said, and Harry heard the ritual under the joke, the old words worn smooth by other mouths. "Name Harry James Potter my heir, by blood of my blood and choice of my will, to hold what I hold when I hold it no longer." The ink in the basin gathered itself. Gornuk beckoned and Harry stepped up to the table and took the little blade and found that his hand was steady, which surprised him more than fear would have. He cut his thumb. It stung less than he expected and bled more, 3 drops. Where his blood met Sirius's, the basin lit. It was not fire. Fire has a color and a direction and wants things. This was a cold blue radiance that came up out of the ink like light rising through deep water, and it did not flicker. It breathed, brightening and dimming with the slow certainty of a thing much larger than the room it was happening in. The luminous quill lifted off the table on its own. High above, in the dark, one ledger unchained itself and came down the shelf hand over hand like something climbing, and settled open on the stone beside the basin, and its pages turned themselves in a wind that touched nothing else. The quill began to write. It wrote in the old blue-black, and what it wrote was a tree growing downward across the open page, Sirius at a joining of 2 lines, and above him his parents, and above them theirs, the whole grim constellation of the blacks reeling backward into the dark of the page. And then the quill came down to Sirius again and struck out sideways to the Potters, to a woman named Doria Black who had married a man named Charles Potter 3 generations gone, and Harry watched his own family arrive on the page from an angle he had never once been taught to look. His grandmother's grandmother had been a Black. The gold ran through her, thin but unbroken, down to a clean new name the quill was writing now in letters that steamed faintly as they dried. Harry James Potter. Heir of the House of Black, confirmed. There, Sirius said softly, and there was something under the word he did not bother to hide. Done and dusted. See, pup, that wasn't so. The quill did not stop. It should have stopped. Gornuk's head came up sharply, and the deep-set eyes caught the blue light and held it, and his hand rose, not quite reaching the quill, hovering, because a rite keeper does not touch a rite in progress, even when the rite is doing something it has no business doing. The quill swung back to Harry's new name and struck out from it a second time, downward into the side, into blank page, into territory the black tree had never claimed. And it began to write a second lineage off of him, older than the first, a line that ran back not into constellations, but into a single word the quill wrote in letters that did not steam but glowed, steady and cold and blue. Peverell. The ledger on the shelf above shuddered. 2 more ledgers unchained themselves in the dark and came down. That is not possible, Gornuk said, and it was the first thing he had said that sounded like a man rather than a monument. The black rite reads black blood, it does not read a stranger's. Peverell isn't a stranger to the Potters, Hermione said. She had come to the table without anyone telling her she could, and she was not looking at Harry, she was looking at the page, reading it upside down and faster than the quill could write, her whole face lit blue from below. Ignatus Peverell. The Potters descend from Ignatus. It's in the old genealogies, it's practically a footnote. Everyone treats it as a legend because the Peverells died out 800 years ago and legends are cheaper than research. Girl, Gornuk said. The quill had stopped writing Harry's second line. It hung over the page, trembling the way a compass needle trembles when it cannot find north because there are 2. And then it turned all the way around and pointed at Hermione. Girl, Gornuk said again, and this time it was almost gentle, which was worse. Give the basin your blood. Hermione went white. I'm Muggle-born. My parents are dentists. There's nothing in my blood but Granger's as far back as anyone's bothered to keep, and nobody's bothered far. Whatever that thing thinks it's found, it's a mistake. The rite's reading the room instead of the rite does not read the room. Gornuk held out the little silver blade to her across the table, hilt first, and the blue light ran along it. The rite reads the truth and is often the first to know it. You have been looked at twice in my bank today by goblins who could not have told you why. The vault remembers a face before the face remembers the vault. Give the basin your blood and we will all stop guessing. Harry watched her not want to. He knew the shape of it because he had spent his whole life not wanting to be the thing rooms decided he was, and he knew what it cost to pick the knife up anyway. He put his hand flat on the table beside the basin, not touching her, just there as she had put 2 fingers on his sleeve in the hall above. Look, Hermione took the blade. She cut her thumb as she did everything precisely once, and 3 drops fell into the basin where the ink already breathed with 2 men's blood in it, and the light did not brighten. It roared. The blue radiance stood up out of the basin a full foot into the air, silent, and the whole chamber answered, not 2 ledgers now but a dozen, unchaining themselves up and down the dark shelves and coming down like a slow rain of iron and paper, settling in a ring around the table, opening themselves, offering their pages to a light that leapt from one to the next, reading them all at once. The green smell under the iron grew stronger, wet and living, the smell of a thing that has been asleep under a hill for 800 years turning over toward the surface. Quill fell to the page and wrote so fast the letters blurred, and it wrote off of Hermione a lineage that plunged down through Grangers, yes, Grangers and more Grangers, generations of ordinary people who had kept no records because the world had told them they had nothing to keep, and then 6 generations down it struck a name the world had tried very hard to forget. A daughter burned off a tapestry, married to a Muggle and struck from the gold and mourned by no one who was allowed to say so. The quill wrote her back onto the page in letters that steamed like Harry's had, the ink pooling thick where they dried, a struck name given somewhere to go at last. Iris black, and above her the constellation, and beside the black line running alongside it and older than it in cold, steady letters that glowed and did not steam, Peverell. The two names hung over Hermione as they hung over Harry. Black, Peverell, the same two. The quill lifted one last time and drew, between his name and hers, across the whole width of the page, a single bright line joining the two trees at the root, and where the line closed, the light in the basin sighed down out of the air and went still, and the ledgers on the floor turned their own pages shut one by one like eyes closing, and the chamber was quiet and cold and enormous. Gornuk stood with both hands flat on the table and his head bowed over the basin, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. When he raised his head he looked at Sirius first, and then at Harry, and last and longest at Hermione, and his ancient face had rearranged itself into an expression Harry had not seen a goblin wear and would not soon forget, the look of a man who has opened a familiar door and found the sea standing behind it. "Came here," Gornuk said slowly, "to make a boy the heir of one house." "Yes," Sirius said, his voice had lost all its ease. "You will leave having found two children who are between them the last of two." He looked down at the page, at the bright line joining the trees. House Black and House Peverell not divided between them, doubled, each carries both. The rite cannot separate what the blood has braided. His hand moved over the basin as though he might close it and could not decide whether he had the right. "In 800 years the Peverell record has not been touched. We keep it because we keep everything. We did not expect to read it again. We certainly did not expect to read it twice in 1 hour off two hands that met in the same room by what you would call chance." "It wasn't chance," Hermione said. She had stopped being white. She had gone somewhere past that, into the clear cold place she went when a thing was too large to feel and had to be understood instead. Rites like this. "Old blood magic, it responds to proximity, doesn't it? Two heirs of the same dormant house in contact, close together over an open record. That's not coincidence finding us. That's the two of us walking into a room and completing a circuit that's been open for 8 centuries. She looked at Harry, and the blue afterlight was still fading off her face, and her voice when it came was quieter than he had ever heard it. "It didn't find our blood because we came to Gringotts. It's been waiting for us to be in the same place. That's why the tellers looked at me. The bank felt the circuit close the moment we walked in together." "Yes," Gornuk said simply. "Then say the word you keep not saying." Hermione's voice had steadied into the register she used for cross-examining a text that was hiding something. "You called us the last of two houses. Last is a legal word, not a poetic one. It means no other claimant survives who can pass the rite. It means the Wisengamot cannot seat a rival over us, because a rival would have to bleed into that basin and the basin would call him a liar. That is what you're telling us, that between the two of us we are not merely descended from these houses. We are, as far as the record can prove, the only living people on earth who can hold them." Gornuk inclined his head a fraction, which from a rite keeper was a bow. "The record proves what the record proves." Antioch's line was believed spent. Ignatius's ran thin through the Potters to one boy. The black line narrows to a man with no child and a struck-off daughter's blood surfacing where no one thought to keep it. 4 threads, girl, and 4 is not many, and 4 have just become 2, and 2 are standing in my hall holding hands over an open ledger. He straightened. "You asked me to say the word, I will say a harder one. Soul. You are the sole heirs jointly of House Black and House Peverell. There is no 5th thread the basin fears. That is your shield. It is also the reason you will be hunted. A power with only 2 doors into it is a power a determined man can imagine owning." Sirius sat down on the edge of the stone table, which no one had told him he could do, and put his face in his hands for a moment, and when he took them away he was almost laughing, the helpless laughter of a man watching a tidy thing become the opposite of tidy. "I brought you here," he said to Harry, "to hand you one clean fact so you'd never have to fight for it." He gestured at the basin, the ledgers, the enormous quiet room, Hermione standing in the ruin of everything she had believed about her own bloodless, ordinary, dentist-descended self. "And instead the two of you have inherited the oldest argument in the wizarding world, and half the people in it would kill to be standing where you're standing." "Then we shouldn't tell half the people," Harry said. Gornuk's head turned, the deep eyes fixed on him, and something in them approved. "No," the rite keeper said, "you should not, but you will not have the choosing of it for long." He set his palm on the open ledger, and the blue line joining the 2 trees flickered under his hand. "A record made in the Hall of Blood and Ink is sealed to Gringotts. We do not sell it, we do not lend it. But there are wizards who own goblins in all the ways gold allows, and there are goblins who owe wizards more than they should, and a thing that 8 ledgers have woken to sing about is not a thing that stays whispered. You have perhaps a fortnight before someone who is not your friend knows what you learned today." He closed the ledger. "Spend it deciding what you are. It is a great deal easier to defend a thing you have already understood." They came up out of the earth into a Diagon alley gone gold with late afternoon, and the ordinariness of it was almost an insult. A witch argued with a stallholder about the price of newt spleens. 2 children pressed their faces to the window of the Quidditch shop. The world had not noticed that anything had happened, because as far as the world knew nothing had, and Harry stood on the marble steps of the bank with his thumb still faintly aching, and understood that this was going to be the strangeness of it. That he now carried something the size of a mountain and would have to buy his newt spleens and mend his own glasses and be looked at by ordinary people as only himself. Hermione had not spoken since the chamber. She walked between him and Sirius with her arms wrapped around a book she was not reading, and the set of her shoulders was a language he had spent 5 years learning to read. He waited until Sirius had gone ahead to argue on principle with a man selling anti-muggle wards from a cart, and then he touched her elbow and they stopped in the mouth of a quieter alley where the gold light did not reach. "Say it," he said. "Whatever it is, you've been carrying it up 19 flights of goblin cart." "I'm not what I thought I was," she said it to the wall over his shoulder, which was how he knew it was true and cost her. "My whole life, Harry, I have been the girl who earned it, everything. Every spell, every mark, every place in every room I was never supposed to be in. I read my way there, I did the work. Nobody handed me a single thing because there was nothing to hand, because I came from nowhere, and I was proud of coming from nowhere. Do you understand? It was mine. It meant everything I built." She stopped. Her jaw worked. "And now a bank tells me I'm the heir of 2 ancient houses, and it was in my blood the whole time and I didn't earn any of it. It was just there, waiting, like an inheritance, like the exact thing I always told myself I didn't need, and secretly." She shut her mouth on the word. "Secretly what?" Harry said. "Nothing, Hermione. Secretly wanted a place I didn't have to fight for." She looked at him then, and her eyes were bright and hard and not, he thought, entirely aimed at him. "And I hate that it feels like relief. I've been carrying that feeling like something stolen since the basin lit. That's the thing I hauled up the flights." Harry thought about it. He was not clever as she was clever in fast, bright leaps, but he was clever in the manner of a person who had spent a long time watching people from a cupboard under the stairs, and he knew a few things about earning and inheriting that she, who had always had to earn, had never had to learn. "You didn't inherit being brilliant," he said. "The blood didn't read you a book. It didn't teach you the runes you already know or the 4 courtesies of goblin protocol you were reciting under your breath while Gornuk pretended not to be impressed." Her mouth moved, caught. "You built all of that. The blood just tells you where you're standing. It doesn't tell you who's standing there." He shrugged, a little helplessly, because he was not used to being the one who explained. "I've had a name my whole life that everybody else decided the meaning of. The boy who lived. You have no idea how much of me is spent every day being not that. The name's just the room, Hermione. You're still the one who has to live in it. And you're the best person I've ever known at deciding who she is in a room that decided for her." She looked at him for a long moment in the shadow of the alley, and then she did something she had not done in 5 years of being his friend. She stepped forward and put her forehead against his collarbone briefly, the top of her head under his chin, and stood there and let him not see her face. "2 houses," she said, muffled. "Apparently. Both of us have both. Apparently. That's not how inheritance works, Harry. 2 heirs, 1 house each, that I could survive. But 2 heirs and each of us carries both lines. The magic won't be able to invest either of us alone. You understand that, don't you?" Gornuk understood it. He said it. "It can't separate what the blood has braided." She lifted her head, and the clear, cold understanding was back in her face, and under it, brand new, something that had not been there this morning in the good light of Grimmauld Place. "Whatever we are now, we're it together. There isn't a version where one of us takes this up and the other goes back to being ordinary. The rite drew a line between us. It closed a circuit." Down the alley, Sirius had won his argument with the ward seller and was coming back toward them with 2 ice creams he had not paid for and a grin he had definitely stolen. "I know," Harry said. "You're not saying anything about it. I don't have anything to say about it that I'd take back." He took the ice cream Sirius pushed at him without looking away from her. "You've been standing next to me in every impossible room I've ever been in. I don't know why I'd want the first possible one to be different." Hermione took her own stolen ice cream and looked at it and did not eat it, and Harry recognized the gesture as his own from the morning, a person holding an ordinary thing while the large thing settled, and he thought that of all the proofs the day had offered him, the ledgers, the light, the 2 names in cold blue letters, the one he believed most was this. That whatever had woken under the hill had woken to the 2 of them at once, and had drawn its bright line between them, and had been in its ancient and patient way entirely correct. "We'll need to research it," Hermione said finally, which was how he knew she was going to be all right. "Obviously," said Harry. "Properly, primary sources. The goblins have the record, but the record only proves what? It doesn't explain how or what it means or what a Peverell inheritance even is. Everyone treats them as a fairy story, and fairy stories are the most dangerous kind of history because nobody thinks to check them." "There she is," Sirius said fondly, arriving. "For a minute down there I thought we'd lost you to the awe. Come on, both of you. Whatever you've become, you become it hungry, and there's a house full of light waiting, and I for one refuse to inherit 2 ancient bloodlines on an empty stomach." They walked up the golden alley together, and the ordinary world let them pass through it unremarked, which was its own kind of mercy. Grimmauld Place had kept the light while they were gone. It It came slantwise now, evening light, and it lay in long bars across the drawing-room floor where the morning bars had been, and Harry noticed that the house did not sulk when they came in, that it opened its doors for them one after another down the hall, which it had never once done for him before. He said nothing. He was learning that some of what he was going to notice from now on was better left unspoken until he understood it. Kreacher was waiting at the foot of the stairs. The old house elf had spent the summer somewhere between his ancient loyalties and his new ones, a creature caught in the act of changing its mind, and he had taken to shadowing Sirius through the house with a devotion that embarrassed them both. He bowed to Sirius. He bowed with visible effort to Harry. And then he turned to Hermione and stopped, and his great pale eyes went round, and he did a thing he had never done for the Muggle-born girl he had spent 2 years calling names under his breath. He bent all the way to the floor, both hands spread, the bow of a servant to a daughter of the house. "Mistress," Kreacher said in a cracked whisper, and the word came out of him without permission, dragged up by something older than his opinions. Hermione stood very still. Kreacher smells it," the elf said, straightening, staring at her as at a ghost he had been told all his life was only a story. The old blood, the struck-off blood, the daughter that was burned. Kreacher's mother served her before the master's mother had her name put out, Iris. He said the name like a coal he had been holding in his mouth for 80 years. Iris of the house, who loved a Muggle and was made nothing. And here she's come back up out of nothing, standing in the hall, and the house opened its doors. He looked at the ceiling, at the walls, at the portraits that had gone unusually quiet in their frames. "The house knows, mistress. The house has been waiting to know." Sirius put a hand on the newel post and looked at the old elf, and for once had nothing clever ready. They ate in the kitchen because the kitchen was warm and the dining room was full of ancestors. Kreacher cooked like the meal was a battle he intended to win, and kept setting things in front of Hermione first, a small mutiny against 3 centuries of his own training, and she let him, because she had understood faster than any of them that to refuse it would break something in him he had only just found. Sirius told stories of his cousins to fill the quiet, the good and the terrible braided together the way family always is. Andromeda, who had married her Muggle-born and been struck off the same tapestry as Iris 3 centuries later, and who was, Sirius said, the only cousin worth a nut and the only one who would understand what the day had done to them. Regulus, who had died young in the dark and might have been saved by a house with more light in it. He talked, and the food went round, and the ordinary business of a family being a family covered the enormous thing at the table like a cloth thrown over furniture. It was late when Sirius stopped joking. "Here's what I want you to hear," he said, turning his glass without drinking. "Not tonight, not while it's fresh, but I want it said before we sleep. Gornuk gave you a fortnight. He's a pessimist, which is the only sort of goblin worth trusting, so call it a week. In a week, someone is going to know 2 things, that the Black Line has an heir who isn't a pureblood cousin they can flatter or frighten, and that a name 800 years dead has come back to the surface attached to 2 children who don't yet know what it's worth." He set the glass down. "The first thing makes enemies of half the old families. The second makes enemies of things that aren't families at all. I've spent a long time around people who covet, pup. It's the one appetite that never gets full. And there is nothing on this earth a coveter wants more than a great power sitting in hands too young to have learned to close." "Then we learn," Hermione said. Her plate was clean. Her mind, Harry could see, was already 3 days into the future and unpacking crates. "We learn what a Peverell inheritance is before anyone can tell us it's theirs. We learn the law of the 2 houses before anyone writes us out of it. Gornuk's right that it's easier to defend a thing you understand, so we understand it, all of it, first." She looked at Harry across the table, and the candle stood between them and put a moving light in her eyes. "You in?" Harry thought of the basin and the bright line and Kreacher bowing to the floor and the doors opening down the hall one after another for a girl the house had waited 3 centuries to welcome home. "I've never once let you go into a library alone," he said. "I'm not going to start with the dangerous one." Sirius laughed, and the sound of it was the last ordinary thing in a day that had run out of ordinary things, and he sent them up to bed. Harry lay a long time listening to the house that no longer sulked, to the settling sounds of old wood deciding after all to hold. Somewhere below, Hermione's lamp burned. He could see the line of it under his door, gold on the floorboards, and it did not go out, and he found he was glad of that in a house full of the newly woken dead there was one warm and ordinary light still working through the night, refusing to be finished, and belonging now to both of them. Far away and far below, in a chamber of iron and ink, 8 ledgers lay quiet on the stone around a basin gone dark, and between 2 trees on a single page a bright line held, and waited, in the manner of things that have learned that the surface always, always comes. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The Ledger of Lost Daughters. Hermione had turned the drawing room into a war table by Thursday. She did it completely, the only setting she owned, so that a stranger walking in would have thought a tidy and well-provisioned army had chosen to make it stand among the Black family furniture. Books stood open in ranks across the long table, held flat with paperweights she had requisitioned from 4 different rooms. Rolls of parchment climbed one wall, pinned at the corners, each a branch of a tree she was rebuilding by hand because she did not trust a tree someone else had drawn. She had colored the certainties in black ink and the guesses in red, and there was a great deal more red than black, and she plainly intended to change that ratio before she slept. Harry brought her tea at intervals and read what she told him to read, and understood perhaps 2 words in 5, which he had decided was a respectable rate for a person who was not Hermione Granger. He had also taken it upon himself to be the one who noticed when she had stopped eating, because someone had to, and it had turned out to be a job with steady hours. "Stop drawing lines for 1 minute," he said, setting the cup by her elbow where she would find it without looking. "Tell me what you actually know, out loud, small words, pretend I'm Ron." That earned him half a look. Ron would have wandered off to the kitchen by now. "Then pretend I'm a slightly more attentive Ron with excellent tea instinct." She sat back and pushed her hair off her face with the side of her wrist and left a streak of red ink along her cheekbone she would be annoyed about later. "All right, what I know, 4 bloodlines, 2 houses, the black line I can trace because the blacks were vain enough to write down every breath any of them ever took. You come to black through your grandmother's mother, Doria. That's clean, that's documented, the goblins confirmed it, no one can argue it." She tapped the black ink. "I come to black through Iris. Iris Black, born 1790-something, struck off the tapestry for marrying a muggle named Granger. My great-great-great-grandmother, near enough. And the reason no one ever found her is that the moment they burned her off the tree, the wizarding world stopped writing about her, and the muggle world had no reason to write about her at all, so she fell straight down the crack between 2 histories that don't talk to each other. She had a daughter who was a squib. And then a line of muggles, and then 150 years later, me. That's the black half of both of us," Harry said. "That's the half that makes sense. That's the half that makes sense." She turned to the red. "The Peverell half doesn't, I can just about explain. Ignatus Peverell, youngest of 3 brothers, has descendants who become the Potters. That's old, it's thin, but it's a known thing to anyone who reads footnotes, but me." She stood and went to the wall and put one finger on a red branch that ran up into a name and stopped, because above the name there was nothing but her guessing. "I don't come to Peverell through Iris. I checked. Iris was pure black on both sides, no Peverell anywhere near her. So my Peverell blood comes from the Granger side, from the Muggles. Which is impossible because Muggles don't carry the blood of the oldest wizarding line in Britain. That's the entire definition of being a Muggle. Unless," said a voice from the doorway, "the line went to ground on purpose and did it well and did it early, and did it for a reason that would have made your Iris look like a girl who merely eloped." The woman in the doorway had Sirius's bones and none of his laughter. Harry had met Andromeda Tonks twice and been unable both times to stop looking at her, because she had her sister's face. Bellatrix's face, with the madness poured out of it and something steady and tired put in its place, so that looking at her was like looking at a photograph of a storm taken on a calm day. She wore traveling clothes and carried a slim case, and she stood in the doorway of her childhood home for the first time in 30 years and did not come in until Sirius, behind her, put a hand between her shoulder blades. "Andromeda," Hermione said, and there was something careful in it. "Miss Granger." Andromeda's eyes went to the wall of parchment and moved along it, reading, and Harry watched her find the name Iris and stop. Or should I be practicing something longer? Sirius's letter was characteristically dramatic and characteristically short on detail. He said the 2 of you had walked into Gringotts as an heir and a hanger-on and walked out as the last of the Peverells, and that if I did not come at once he would tell me the rest in person purely to watch my face. She came into the room at last. "Here I am, ruined my composure. It has survived worse rooms than this one," they told her. Hermione did most of it because Hermione had it ordered, and Andromeda listened the way a surgeon listens, without expression and without a single wasted question. And when it was done, she set her case on the table and opened it and took out a wand and a black velvet roll and a pair of half-moon spectacles that made her look, suddenly, like everyone's most terrifying aunt. "Then let us do this properly," she said, "since properly is apparently the only weapon the 2 of you have thought to bring to a war. I know things about this family that were never written down, because in this family the things worth knowing were the things you did not dare put on paper. I know which daughters were burned and which merely vanished, and I know the difference, and so did they, and so, it seems, does that bank." She unrolled the velvet. Inside lay a ring, old gold, worn smooth, a black stone with a device cut into it too faint to read. "And I brought this because if we are talking about blood that remembers, we may as well use a thing that was built to." The ring had been her mother's, Andromeda said, one of the modest heirlooms a daughter could carry out of a house like this without anyone deciding she had stolen it, because it was only a ring, only a bit of old gold with a family device worn nearly off. It was a recognition ring. The blacks had made a dozen of them in better centuries, keyed to the house itself, so that a black could press one to a door or a cup with the hand of a stranger and know at once whether the thing was theirs. They used them to check the servants, Andromeda said, dry as chalk, and the marriage prospects, and in the very worst years the children, when a wife's fidelity was in doubt. We were not a warm people. But the magic is honest, which is more than could be said for the people who commissioned it. She held the ring out on her palm to Hermione. "It will do nothing in my hand, it knows me, put it on." Hermione did not reach for it. Harry saw her not reach, saw her look at the ring with the same stillness she had brought to the silver blade in the goblin's hall, and he understood that she had spent a week climbing out of the shock of one impossible thing and was being asked gently to walk back into it. "If it recognizes me," Hermione said, "then it's real, all of it. Not a goblin ledger I could tell myself misread a smudge of old ink, a thing my hand can feel." "Yes," said Andromeda, "and if it doesn't, then I have carried a worthless ring across London and you will have the pleasure of telling a bank it made a mistake, which I would pay gold to watch." Andromeda's voice did not soften, but something behind it did. "You are afraid it will say yes, and you are afraid it will say no, and you cannot tell which fear is louder. I know that ground, Miss Granger. I stood on it the day I chose Ted Tonks and let this family strike me off a wall. The only way off the ground is through it." She turned her hand a degree, offering, "Through it." Hermione took the ring. She put it on the third finger of her right hand, and for a moment nothing happened, and Harry felt the whole room lean. Then the black stone woke. It was not the blue of the goblin's basin. It was warmer, a deep amber light that started at the heart of the stone and spread out along the worn device until the device was legible again. A shield quartered with stars, and the gold of the band ran warm against Hermione's skin, and a low tone sounded in the room that was not quite a sound, more a pressure behind the ears, the note a great bell makes in the second before you hear it. Creature, who had crept in to stand by the door and had not been sent away, made a sound in his throat and went down on one knee. "Blood of the house," the old elf whispered. The ring knows the daughter." Hermione stood with her hand held out from her body and the amber light moving over her face and did not say anything at all, and Harry crossed the room and stood beside her close, his shoulder against hers, and let the knot sound press behind both their ears together, and after a moment her free hand found his and gripped it hard enough to hurt, and he let it because some proofs you had to hold on to something to survive. "Real," she said, very quietly. "Real," Harry agreed. "I have his eyes." She was looking at the shield in the stone, at the 4 stars. "The muggle who married Iris, Granger. I have a photograph of him at home, my mother keeps it on the stairs, and I have his eyes, and my whole life that was the only inheritance I thought I had. A dead muggle's eyes." Her thumb moved over the warm gold on her finger, and under it all along this, waiting to be told it was allowed to shine. Andromeda watched them both, the 2 children joined at the hand under the light of a ring built by people who would have hated everything they were, and whatever was behind her tired eyes she kept it to herself. "Well," she said at last, "that is the black half settled beyond argument. A ledger can be leaned on. A ring cannot be flattered. Now." She sat and drew a fresh roll of parchment toward her and uncapped her own ink, black, no red. "Tell me about the impossible half. Tell me about the Peverell blood that is walking around in a muggle line, and let us find out together why anyone would hide the oldest name in Britain inside the safest place in the world, which is a family nobody important has ever bothered to look at twice." The black portraits did not like to be woken, and Phineas Nigellus liked it least of all. He hung in a narrow upstairs bedroom that had been his in life, a lean man in green robes with a pointed beard and an expression of permanent disappointment, and he had been, Sirius said with some relish, the least popular headmaster Hogwarts ever had, which in a school that had employed several outright disasters was an achievement of pure personality. He opened one painted eye when they came in and closed it again, and said to the ceiling of his frame, "I am asleep. I am a very old and very tired painting, and I am asleep, and I shall remain asleep until this house is once again inhabited by people with the decency to be purebloods." "Then you'll sleep forever, you miserable relic," Sirius said cheerfully, "because I've filled it with a werewolf, a blood traitor, a muggle-born, and my cousin who married a muggle-born, and we're all having a marvelous time." Both painted eyes opened. Phineas Nigellus looked at Sirius, at Andromeda, at Harry, and last at Hermione, and the disappointment on his face deepened by a degree, and then as his painted gaze rested on her, it did something the living portrait had not planned. It sharpened. The bored contempt fell away and left behind the look of a man who prided himself on knowing every branch of his own family and had just seen a face he could not place on the tree. "You," he said to Hermione, and it was not a sneer. "Come closer, girl, into the light. No, the ring hand. Show me the hand." Hermione lifted her right hand, and the amber stone caught the lamplight, and the shield of stars showed faint in the worn gold. Phineas Nigellus was silent for the length of 3 breaths, which for him was a geological age. "That ring," he said at last, "was my wife's. It was made in my father's time, keyed to the house, and it has not warmed for a living hand in 140 years, because there has been no hand living worth its warming, and now it sits on the finger of a child who reeks of muggle upbringing and reads, I can see from here, entirely too much." His painted fingers steepled. "It has warmed, so there is a daughter's blood back in this house that the tapestry swears was burned." "Which daughter?" "Iris," Andromeda said. "Iris, whom your grandson struck off for marrying a man named Granger." "Iris." The portrait said the name slowly, tasting a century in it. I remember the scandal. I was already paint by then, but paint hears everything, and the family talked of nothing else for a season. A great beauty, a greater fool. She could have had any pureblood in England, and she chose a muggle who fixed people's teeth of all the degrading trades, and she went to him gladly and never once wrote home. He looked at Hermione with an expression that was trying very hard to remain contemptuous and was failing at the edges. And here you are, her blood, wearing her grandmother's ring, standing in her father's house, cleverer by the look of you than anyone this family produced in 3 generations of marrying its own cousins. It is exactly the sort of thing that would have given my grandson an apoplexy, and for that reason alone I find I do not entirely object to you. Do not repeat that. I shall deny it, and I am a painting, and paintings always win. Harry watched Hermione, who had come into a room braced to be insulted by a dead bigot and had instead been handed, in the most backhanded terms available to the English language, a welcome. There's more than black in her, Harry said. There's Peverell in both of us. That's the part we came to ask about. You knew this family's secrets. Did you ever hear the Peverell name spoken in this house? The change in the portrait was immediate and total. Phineas Nigellus sat forward in his frame, and the painted disappointment was gone, and in its place was something Harry had not expected to see on the face of a man who had spent his death being smug. Caution, the careful stillness of someone deciding how much of a dangerous thing to say aloud. Once, the portrait said. I heard it spoken once by my grandfather when he did not know a grandchild was listening, and he spoke it the way men speak of a fortune they were not brave enough to reach for. The blacks married everyone worth marrying, children. We collected bloodlines the way lesser families collect gold. And there was always one line the blacks wanted and never got because it could not be found, because it had gone to ground so long ago and so completely that even our matchmakers, who could trace a pedigree through a locked box in the dark, lost it. His painted eyes moved between Harry and Hermione. The Peverells. My grandfather believed a fragment of that blood had come into a cadet black line by accident, generations back, and been lost again when a daughter was struck off. He believed it, and he could never prove it, and it drove him to his grave still hunting. If he is anywhere capable of knowing that 2 children have walked into Gringotts and proved not a fragment but the whole of it, both the eldest brother's line and the youngest joined, then wherever he is not resting. The portrait's mouth thinned. And I will tell you the thing my grandfather said that I have never forgotten, because a painting forgets nothing, and I have had a great deal of time to consider it. He said the Peverell name is not a prize, it is a bait. Whoever wears it visibly draws every hungry thing in the wizarding world toward them. That is why the wise ones hid, and that is why the 3rd brother's line, which did not hide, which wore its inheritance openly and greedily, went mad and murderous and ended in the gutter. He fixed them both with his painted stare. You have chosen to stop hiding. I do not need to be alive to see how that ends unless you are very strong, or very lucky, or very well guarded. I suggest you arrange to be all 3. Now leave me. This is more feeling than I have expended since I died, and I find it exhausting. He shut his painted eyes and refused, with the total commitment of the dead, to open them again. The rest of the answer took them 3 days and a return to Gringotts, and a conversation with Gornock that Harry would remember all his life for the way the old goblin's voice changed, when he stopped explaining and started almost to marvel. They went down again to the Hall of Blood and Ink, the 4 of them this time, and Gornock did not make them prove anything, because the ledgers already knew their faces now and stirred on their chains when the cart came in, a rustle running up the dark shelves like wind through a field of iron. He had prepared. On the stone table lay a single ledger older and plainer than the rest, its cover not iron-cornered but bound in something pale that Harry did not ask about, and its pages were the color of weak tea and so thin the writing showed through from the other side. The Peverell record, Gornock said. It has 1 page for each generation, and after the 3rd brother's line the pages are mostly empty, because after the 3rd brother the name mostly ended. Antioch the eldest died without acknowledged issue. Cadmus the middle has a line I will not read aloud in a room with children of good blood in it, because it runs down into the Gaunts, and the Gaunts ran down into a thing that is currently the chief argument for keeping the Peverell name buried. His deep eyes flicked up, and there was a warning folded into the marvel. Ignatus, the youngest, ran to the potters and thinned, and reached the young man standing there mending his own spectacles because he does not trust anyone to do it for him. And Antioch, Hermione said, you said died without acknowledged issue. Acknowledged is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. Gornock's mouth moved, and it might have been the beginning of a smile, and it might only have been the light. You would have made a formidable right-keeper, girl, in a world that let human women near the ledgers, which ours does not, and which is our loss, and I will deny having said so. He turned the tea-colored page. Antioch Peverell was the brother the stories make a fool of. Proud, loud, killed in his sleep for a wand he could not stop boasting about. That is the tale. Tales are written by the living, and the living had reasons. Here is what the ledger keeps, which the tales do not. He set 1 long finger under a line of writing so faint it was nearly nothing. A daughter. Born to Antioch of a woman he never married and never named, hidden the year before he died, given to a family of no importance in the West Country and never spoken of again, because a proud man's bastard is a proud man's shame, and because a proud man who had made enemies knew that the surest way to keep a child alive is to make certain no one important knows the child exists. The room had gone very still. Even the ledgers on their chains had stopped their rustling. He hid her among ordinary people, Hermione said slowly, on purpose, because being nobody was the safest thing she could be. He hid her, Gornuk said, so well that in 800 years the only proof she ever lived is one line in a book that no living wizard but I had caused to open, and a girl who walked into my hall last week and made the record sing. Antioch's line did not end. It went down into the West Country and became farmers and became laborers and became clerks and became at the very last a dentist's daughter who reads too much. He closed the ancient ledger with great gentleness. The eldest brother's blood and the youngest brother's blood, kept apart 800 years by an ocean of ordinary lives, and you brought them back into the same room holding hands over an open rite. The Peverell line did not survive by accident, children. It survived by hiding. And it has just, for the first time since the three brothers stood on a bridge and frightened the world, stopped hiding. Harry looked at the pale ledger, and at Hermione's hand where the amber ring still lay warm on her finger, and he thought about a man 8 centuries dead who had loved a child enough to make her nothing so that she could live, and he understood, in a way that went past the forensics and past the awe and into somewhere quieter, that the two of them were standing at the far downstream end of an act of protection so old and so patient that it had outlasted the language it was performed in. "There's a third brother's line, though," he said. "Cadmus, you said it runs down to the Gaunts. To the thing that keeps the Peverell name buried," Gornuk said. "Yes, there is a third door, there is always a third door, Antioch to the girl, Ignatus to the young man, and Cadmus to a claimant who would give a very great deal to be the one whose blood the basin sang for, and whose blood the basin will never sing for, because his line chose a different inheritance and it curdled." He straightened and the marvel went out of his voice and the warning stood alone. "You ask me for proof, you have it now past any denying. Understand what the proof also is. It is a map. Anyone who reads what you have read learns not only that you are the last Peverells, they learn there is one more line that thinks the name should have been its own, and they learn exactly how few of you there are." He replaced the pale ledger on its shelf, and it climbed back into the dark on its chain, and then he did a thing none of them expected. He led them out of the Hall of Blood and Ink, not up toward the light but further down, along a passage so old the goblins had not troubled to carve it until the passage ended at a door. The door was black stone, seamless, taller than Sirius and twice as wide, and it had no handle and no keyhole and no lock that Harry could find. Set into its face was a single carving, worn nearly smooth by nothing anyone could name, because no hand had touched it in centuries, 3 objects arranged in a shape older than any wizarding crest. A wand, a stone, a cloak thrown over both so that the whole made a rough triangle with a line down its center and a circle at its heart. Andromeda made a sound. Sirius said nothing at all. "The Vault of Peverell," Gornuk said, and his deep voice had gone quiet in a manner Harry would only later understand was reverence, the reverence of a keeper for the one door in his whole domain he has never been able to open. "It has stood sealed since the line went to ground, not locked, sealed. There is a difference, children, and it is the difference between a thing men made and a thing older magic made. A lock can be picked or bribed or blasted. Goblins have tried all 3 on this door across the centuries, in the years when we still believed everything underground was ours to open. We stopped trying a long time ago." He set his palm flat against the black stone and nothing happened, and he took it away. "It answers to nothing I am. It answers to nothing any wizard has been able to bring to it. It answers, the oldest of our records say, to the blood of the line entire, not a fragment, not one strand." The line gathered and whole standing before it, willing. He turned and looked at the two of them and did not need to say the rest. Harry felt it before Gornuk finished looking, not in the door, in himself, and he could tell without turning in Hermione beside him because her hand had found the back of his sleeve again, 2 fingers, the old signal, and this time it was not saying look, it was saying steady. The carving on the black stone had begun, very faintly, to glow, not amber and not blue. A color he had no word for that lived somewhere in the seam between the two, and it grew no brighter than the last coal in a grate, and it did not open the door, and it did not try to. It only woke a fraction the way a sleeper stirs at a familiar footstep in the hall without yet coming awake, and then, as if deciding they were not ready or it was not, it dimmed again to nothing. "It knows us," Hermione said. Her voice had gone somewhere very small. "It knows you are near," Gornuk corrected softly. "It knows the line has come back into the world and stands at last on both feet. It will not open for children who do not yet understand what they are asking it to give them, and you are wise not to ask, but it stirred. Do you understand what you have just seen? In 8 centuries, that carving has never once stirred, because in 8 centuries the line has never once stood whole before it. It is stirring because you exist, both of you, together." He turned back toward the light. "Come away." There's a time for that door, and it is not today, and a thing that has waited 800 years can wait until you are ready to be worthy of it, but now you have seen it. Now you know the second half of your inheritance is not a name in a book, it is a door, and behind the door is whatever the three brothers thought was worth hiding from the entire world. They rode back up toward the daylight in silence, all four of them, and Harry did not look at the others because he did not trust his face, and behind and below them the black door stood sealed in the dark as it had stood for 8 centuries, except that now, for the length of a few breaths, it had been looked at by the only 2 people alive it had been waiting for. The map, it turned out, was already being read. The letter came to Grimmauld Place on the 4th morning, and it came the polite way, by a grey ministry owl with a brass tag on its leg, and it was addressed in a hand so fine and so cold that Harry knew before he broke the seal that it had been written by someone who had practiced being unhurried. Andromeda read it over his shoulder and made a sound low in her throat that creature, across the kitchen, echoed without knowing why. "Lucius," she said. "It's from the ministry," Harry said. "Department of Magical Heritage, it's a summons. It wants Hermione and me to present ourselves for verification of contested lineage claims in a fortnight." "It is from Lucius Malfoy," Andromeda said, "who does not work for the Department of Magical Heritage and who therefore had to reach into it, which tells you precisely how fast the thing you did in that bank has traveled, and precisely whose hand it traveled into." She took the letter from him and read it again, and her surgeon's calm had a new edge under it. "Contested, do you see the word? Someone has already filed a contest. They could not have done it without knowing what you are, and they could not know what you are unless a goblin who owed a wizard's soul to whisper, exactly as your rite keeper warned you they might. And of all the wizards in Britain who might buy that whisper and know what to do with it, the letter is signed off by a department that Lucius Malfoy has owned a corner of for 20 years. She set it down. "He married my sister Narcissa. Narcissa is a Black. In the ordinary way of things, with Sirius dead and no heir named, the House of Black would have drifted toward her son, toward Draco. Lucius has spent a decade quietly arranging the furniture for exactly that inheritance." "And then I named Harry," Sirius said from the doorway, where he had been standing longer than any of them had noticed, and his face had none of its ease. "4 days ago I named Harry, and the bank told us more than I asked it to, and now Lucius Malfoy has filed a contest before the ink was even dry. He is not contesting the Peverell claim. He can't. He hasn't a drop of it, and he knows the basin would spit him out. He is contesting the black one." He came into the room. "He wants the seat for his son, and I would bet the whole vault that somewhere behind Lucius, not written on any letter, is a man who does not care about the black seat at all, and cares only about the other name, the buried one, the third door, and who is very interested indeed to learn that the 2 children who hold the Peverell line are 16 years old and have just made themselves visible." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a milk cart went by in the ordinary street, and its ordinary bell rang, and Harry thought about how strange it was to hear it. Hermione had picked up the letter and was reading it as she read everything built to trap her slowly from the bottom, hunting the clause that mattered. "A fortnight," she said. "It gives us a fortnight to present ourselves and prove our claim or be found in default, which means for a fortnight the contest is unresolved. Means for a fortnight there is a window in which the black seat is legally contested and the Peverell inheritance is legally unclaimed, and an unclaimed inheritance is a thing anyone with a good enough lawyer and a bad enough heart can reach for." She lowered the letter. "They gave us 14 days on purpose. They think 14 days is enough time for a summons to frighten 2 children and not enough time for those children to do anything about it." "They've never met you," Harry said. "No," Hermione agreed. "They haven't." She had gone back to the letter, and now she turned it over and read the fine print along the bottom margin, the part that summons is always assumed no one read, and her finger stopped on a line. "Here, look at what they've actually done, which is clever than a threat and worse. They haven't accused us of anything. They can't. There's nothing to accuse, so they filed the contest as a question of procedure. Verification of contested lineage claims. They're not saying our claim is false. They're saying it's unverified, which is technically true, because we've proven it to a bank and a ring and a deadhead master and not one single soul at the ministry. And an unverified claim to an ancient house doesn't fail, it hangs. It sits in a drawer marked pending, and while it's pending the house is administered by a ministry custodian, and the ministry custodian for contested pureblood estates has been, for 11 years, the same office Lucius Malfoy funds through 3 different foundations." She lowered the letter. "They don't need to win the contest, they just need to keep it open. An open contest is a leash. As long as it's open, the seat is theirs to manage, the vaults are theirs to freeze, and we are 2 children asking permission to inherit our own blood." Sirius swore once with feeling. "So the trap isn't the summons," Harry said slowly, following her. "The trap is answering it. If we show up in a fortnight to argue our claim, we've agreed the claim is arguable. We've walked into their room and let them run the clock. Now you're doing air law," Hermione said, and there was warmth under it. "That's exactly the trap. The summons is bait too, the same as the name. You don't argue an inheritance you can simply take. You don't ask a custodian's permission to hold a house the oldest magic in Britain has already blood-sealed to you. There's no procedure to contest a completed investiture, because an investiture isn't a claim, it's a fact, and you cannot file a contest against a fact. She turned to Andromeda and to Sirius, and to Gornuk's warning still ringing in her memory, and the red ink was gone from her cheek, but the ordering light was full up in her eyes. So here is what we are going to do with our fortnight, and we are going to do it in the right order, because the order is the only advantage we have. We are not going to spend it preparing to defend a claim in a ministry room owned by Lucius Malfoy. We are going to spend it making the claim impossible to contest. She put the letter face down on the table, done with it. Gornuk said the houses can be reclaimed, fully, by right, not named heir in waiting, which is what I am and what you now are too, Harry, a promise the law can argue with. Reclaimed, invested. Lord and Lady of two houses, blood-sealed, sung for by the basin, witnessed and recorded and beyond the reach of any contest, because you cannot contest a thing the oldest magic in Britain has already decided is done. The reclaiming right needs both of us, Harry said. Gornuk said, it can't invest one without the other. Good, said Hermione, and something in the word was steel and something under the steel was not. Then they'll have to come through both of us, together or not at all. That night the house was quiet in the way that meant everyone in it was awake. Harry found her in the library, which had been the war room and had become, at some point in the last week, simply where they were, the place the two of them ended up when the day ran out of tasks. The lamps were low. She had cleared the table of certainties and guesses and left only one thing on it, the tea-colored copy Gornuk had let her make of the single faint line in the Peverell ledger, the line that was the only proof a hidden daughter had ever lived. You should sleep, Harry said, and sat down across from her, which was not sleeping. So should you. She did not look up from the line. I keep reading it, this one sentence. A man 800 years ago decided the way to keep his daughter safe was to make sure the world never knew her name, and it worked. It worked so completely that she lived, and her children lived, and their children all the way down, generation after generation of people who never knew they were carrying something, who just lived, ordinary, safe, because he hid them. She looked up at last, and the lamplight was warm on her face where the amber ring had been. And now we're about to walk into a ministry room and undo 800 years of that in a single afternoon. Make the name loud again, put it back where enemies can see it. I keep thinking about him, Harry, Antioch, whether he'd think we were fools. Harry considered it. Down the hall a door opened and closed, Sirius checking the wards, the sound of a man who had learned not to trust a quiet house. He hid her because being seen would have got her killed, Harry said. That was true then. It's not the only way to keep someone safe. He reached across the table and turned the tea-colored copy so it faced them both. He made her nothing so she could live. We're not going to do that. We can't. The bank already sang, the map's already out, the whispers already sold. Nobody's getting hidden again, so the only choice left isn't seen or safe. It's seen and strong or seen and weak. He put his finger next to hers on the faint old line, not touching. I think he'd understand that. I think a man who spent his last year making sure his daughter would live would understand two people deciding the way to keep each other alive isn't to disappear. It's to be so completely, provably, irreversibly what they are that no one can pretend otherwise. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she moved her finger the last half-inch and laid it over his, on the line, on the proof, on the 800-year-old sentence that had kept her ancestors alive by keeping them secret. Together or not at all, she said again, but softly this time, not steel, a thing settled between two people rather than declared to a room. Together, Harry said. She turned the tea-colored copy over in her hands, the single faint line that was the whole surviving proof of a hidden daughter, and Harry watched her do it, and understood that she was not reading it anymore, she was keeping it, holding the one sentence that had carried her ancestors quietly down 8 centuries of ordinary life into this lamplit room. It was, he thought, the most valuable object in the house, worth more than the black vaults and the Peverell name together, because everything else the summer had given them could be argued over in a court or coveted by an enemy, and this could not. This was just a girl holding proof that she had come from somewhere after all, and that the somewhere had loved her enough, across all those hidden generations, to keep her safe by keeping her secret, and to let her arrive at last, in the good lamplight, exactly on time. They sat there a while longer with the single lamp and the single line in the great dark house holding still around them. No longer a tomb, not yet anything with a name, and outside the ordinary street slept and did not know, and far away in a marble bank a contest sat filed in a cold fine hand, ticking down its 14 borrowed days, and the two people it had been designed to frighten were not, as it happened, frightened at all. They were, in the low gold light, making a plan. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, 2 rings, one right. Sirius chose the night of the new moon, because the Blacks had always done their oldest magic in the dark, and because he said, if he was going to give away the only thing his family had ever managed to hold on to, he would rather not do it in a flattering light. Before the dark, though, there was a dinner, because Molly Weasley had heard the word right and the word tonight in the same sentence, and had arrived at Grimmauld Place 3 hours early with a hamper and an expression that dared anyone to send her home. She had brought the family with her, or the part of it that could be spared, which meant Arthur turning his hat in his hands and gazing at the old dark house with the helpless wonder of a man who had spent his whole life loving things other people threw away. And Ron, who had gone straight to Harry and gripped his shoulder and said nothing, which from Ron was an oration. And Ginny, who had looked at the two rings that were not yet on anyone's fingers, and then at Harry and Hermione standing close together at the table, and had come to her own swift private conclusion and kept it, for now, behind a raised eyebrow. They filled the long kitchen with noise and steam and the ordinary music of a family that had decided to be one on purpose, and for a while the enormous thing waiting in the cellar was covered over, the way a hard frost is covered by a good fire. "Want to say something and then I'll let you eat," Molly said, standing, and the kitchen quieted for her the way it did for no one else. She looked at Harry and at Hermione, and her chin was not quite steady. "I've heard what you're going to do tonight." Sirius explained it badly because he explains everything badly, and Remus explained it properly after. Two ancient houses, a binding rite, magic older than the ministry, sealing the pair of you together to hold it. She pressed her lips together. "You're 16. When I was 16, the largest decision anyone let me make was the color of my wedding robes, and I got that wrong. And here you both are, choosing to carry something most grown wizards would run from, and choosing to carry it together, and I find I have nothing useful to say about it except this." She looked at Hermione, the girl she had taken in every summer without ceremony, a Muggle-born daughter folded into the family as the most natural acquisition in the world. "You have always had a family, whatever any bank tells you tonight about your blood. This one, this loud, poor, ridiculous one. Whatever grand old houses decide to claim you, you were ours first, and you stay ours after, and if either of those houses forgets to feed you properly, I will hear about it, and I will come." She sat down abruptly, having said more than she meant to. "That's all. Eat." Ron leaned toward Harry under the cover of the returning noise. "You all right, mate?" "Actually all right, not the thing you say." "I don't know yet," Harry admitted, which was truer than all right. "Yeah." Ron looked at Hermione, laughing now at something Ginny had said, the rings glinting on the table between the bread and the butter, and then back at Harry, and his freckled face was, for once, entirely serious. "For what it's worth, the two of you, all this lord and lady, ancient blood, sealed together business." He shrugged, awkward with the size of it. "Nobody who's watched you for 5 years is surprised. We've all just been waiting for the magic to catch up to what the rest of us could already see. So don't do the Harry thing where you decide you've dragged her into danger. She walked in. She always walks in. Let her." He picked up a roll. "Right, that's my emotional labor for the decade. Pass the potatoes before I have a feeling." Harry passed the potatoes and looked down the warm, loud table at the people who had decided to be his, and understood that whatever the cellar was about to make him, this was the thing it would be protecting, and that was worth any right in the world. They gathered in the cellar under Grimmauld Place, in a room Harry had not known existed until Sirius pressed 3 bricks in the kitchen hearth in an order creature wept to see remembered. The stair down was narrow and turned twice, and it opened into a chamber that had none of the house's mildewed grandeur, only bare stone and a floor worked with a design in worn silver wire, a great circle broken by the shapes of stars. The constellations of the family laid into the ground, so that to stand in the room was to stand inside the map the Blacks had made of their own vanity. In the center of the circle, a low stone plinth held nothing at all, a cup-shaped hollow, and its top gone dark with the residue of centuries. Harry had thought he knew what old magic felt like. He had stood in the Hall of Blood and Ink and watched a basin sing and a sealed door stir, and he had believed after that he had taken the measure of ancient things. He had not. This room was different, and the difference was that this room was intimate. The goblin halls were vast and impersonal, the keeping of a whole people. This cellar was small and close and stank faintly of tallow and iron and 3 centuries of family blood, and every star worked into the floor had a name, and every name had done something, and the walls held the residue of it the way a much-used kitchen holds the smell of every meal ever cooked in it. It was not grand. It was worse than grand. It was the private chapel of a family that had worshipped itself, and the two of them were about to change what it worshipped, and the room seemed to know it and to be holding very still, the way a proud old thing holds still when it is being asked at last to become something else. Creature would not come past the 3rd step. Stood on the stair with his great eyes wet and his hands twisting, watching the room that had made his masters, and he said to no one in a voice gone thin with the weight of what he was seeing, "The floor has not woken since the old master died. Creature thought it would never wake again. Creature thought the house would go dark." And no one answered him because there was nothing to say that the waking room was not already saying. "The investiture floor," Andromeda said, and her voice came back off the stone strangely. "I was brought down here once as a girl to watch my father take the ring off his father's coffin. I have not thought about this room in 40 years. I had almost persuaded myself I dreamed it." "You didn't dream it," Sirius said. He had dressed for it in the black formal robes he had refused to wear to anything else, and he looked, standing on the map of his dead relations, more like the lord of the House of Black than Harry had ever seen him, which made what he was about to do stranger. "Nobody dreams this room. It doesn't have the imagination." He turned to Harry and Hermione, who stood together at the edge of the silver circle where he had told them to wait. Right, before we start, I want to say the thing I've been avoiding saying all week, and I want to say it once, and then I never want to discuss it again because I'll get maudlin and Creature will start weeping and we'll be here all night. Remus, on the stair, said, "You're already maudlin, Padfoot. I'm establishing a mood." Sirius did not smile. "Harry, I named you my heir because I wanted to hand you a thing that was yours. That was 10 days ago, and I understood about a tenth of what I was doing. What the bank showed us, since what the two of you are, that's bigger than a title I can gift you. An heir waits. An heir inherits when the old man dies, and the old man, as I keep pointing out, is in no hurry. But you don't have time to wait for me to die. There's a contest ticking and a custodian's leash, and things older and worse than Lucius Malfoy pointed at the pair of you right now. Waiting will get you killed, so I'm not going to make you wait." He drew a slow breath. "I'm going to give it to you now, both of you, tonight. I'm going to relinquish the lordship of the House of Black in a full right into your hands, and I'm going to do it gladly, and I need you to hear the gladly, because I can see you both preparing to argue that I shouldn't." Harry had in fact been preparing exactly that. "Sirius, it's yours. It's the only thing that's ever been yours. I can't take, you can, because I'm not being robbed, I'm giving." Sirius's voice roughened. "Listen to me. This house has been a prison to every soul born into it, and the worst thing it ever did to any of us was convince us it was a treasure. I spent 12 years in one cell and 30 in another, and this house was the second one. I don't want to be its lord. I never wanted to be its lord. I want to be the man who finally opened its doors and let the light in and handed the keys to two children who will make it mean something better than pure." He looked between them, and the roughness steadied into something Harry had no ready word for. "Let me give away the family name to the best two people I've ever seen it landed on. Let me win, Harry, just once. Let me be the Black who chose." There was a silence in the stone room, and into it Hermione said quietly, "What do you need us to do?" Sirius let out a breath that was half a laugh. "That's my girl, practical to the bone." He stepped to the plinth. "You stand where the silver runs to the center, both of you. You give the floor your blood together, and I give it the ring, and then the house decides. Not me, not you, the house. And here's the part your goblin was so careful to warn you about, and he was right to." He looked at them steadily. "It won't take one of you. I've read the old rite through 4 times this week, and it says the same thing every way I turn it. A house can be held by a lord alone, or a lord and lady together, but this rite, the joining rite, the one that seals 2 bloodlines into one holding, it needs 2. If only one of you steps into the center, nothing happens. If both of you step in but one of you is holding back, hesitating, unwilling in the smallest part, the floor knows and nothing happens. It doesn't read your blood at the end, it reads your choice. It reads whether the two of you have decided to hold this together all the way down with nothing kept back." He set the Lord's ring, the heavy signet he had worn since his father died, on the lip of the stone hollow. "So before you step in, I need you to be certain, not of the house, of each other. Because the house is about to ask you in a language older than any of us whether you mean it." Harry looked at Hermione, and Hermione looked at Harry, and the whole strange month came down to the 18 inches of silverworked floor between where they stood and where they would have to stand. "You heard him," Harry said. It came out lower than he meant it. "It reads whether we mean it, all the way down, nothing kept back." "I heard him." She had her arms folded, not against him, against the size of the thing. "Harry, do you understand what we're actually agreeing to? Not a title, not even the 2 houses, really. He's talking about a magic that seals us together. Not married, it isn't that, I read the right too, but bound and holding. What one of us does to the house, both of us answer for. What threatens one of us threatens the seat we both hold. There's no clean way out of it afterward. If we do this, we are, in every way, the oldest magic in Britain can make it, each other's, for the rest of it. However long the rest of it is. I know. You keep saying you know." Her chin came up. "I need to hear you say the part after the I know. I have watched you agree to things because they were the brave option and then spend a year quietly bleeding from them. I won't be a thing you were brave about, Harry. If we walk into that circle, I need it to be because you want to, not because it's the exit." He closed the space between them and took both her hands, which were cold, and held them, and did not look away, because this was one he was not going to get wrong. "When I was 11, he said, I walked into a bathroom to save a girl I barely knew from a troll, and I've spent 5 years pretending I did it because it was the brave option. I didn't. I did it because I'd already decided, somewhere I didn't have words for yet, that a world with you gone from it wasn't one I was going to stand in and watch." Her fingers moved in his. "Every impossible room since then, you've been in it, and the reason they were survivable wasn't the spells or the luck. It was that you were there working the problem while I bought us the seconds. I don't want an exit from that. There's no version of the rest of it I want that has you standing outside the circle." He tightened his hands on hers. "I'm not being brave, Hermione, I'm being honest, which for me is harder. I want to hold this with you, all the way down, nothing kept back. That's not the exit, that's the whole point." She was quiet, and her eyes were bright in the stone room's dimness, and when she spoke her voice had lost its argument and found something steadier underneath it. "All right," she said. "Then stop holding my hands out here where it's safe, and come hold them in the middle where it isn't." They stepped into the circle together. The floor knew them the instant both their feet were inside the silver. The constellations woke. not brightly, not all at once, but star by star, the worn wire kindling to cold, clean light that ran outward from where they stood along the lines of the map, tracing the house's whole grim heaven across the stone, until they were standing in the center of a sky turned inside out, the family's dead ambitions burning quietly at their feet. The green mineral smell of deep places rose up through the floor. Somewhere far above them the house itself answered, a long groan running through its bones from cellar to attic, not the sulking groan Harry knew but something else, a great old structure turning over in its sleep toward a sound it had waited a long time to hear. Sirius lifted the Lord's ring from the plinth and held it over the dark hollow. "I, Sirius Orion Black," he said, and there was no joke left anywhere in him now, only the worn old words carrying their full weight at last. "Last Lord of the ancient and most noble house of Black by the line of my fathers, being of sound mind and willing heart, do relinquish the lordship of this house. Not to death, not to default, by choice, and while I live, into the hands of my named heir and the heir of the blood that stands with his." He dropped the ring into the hollow, and it rang against the stone, a single deep note that the whole room took up and held. "Let the house decide if it will have them." The note did not fade, it grew. Harry felt it come up through the soles of his feet, through his bones, a pressure that was almost sound and almost light and almost nothing he could name, and he understood that the house was reaching into him, into the blood, reading him the way the basin had read him, but slower, more thorough, weighing not just what he was but what he intended. Beside him Hermione's hand found his and gripped, and he gripped back, and they stood in the burning sky of the black constellations, and let the old magic take its measure of them both, and the magic asked its question. It did not come in words. It came as a kind of doubling, a sudden clarity in which Harry could feel, alongside his own heartbeat, another, slower and steadier and entirely Hermione's, and he understood the question the floor was asking without any language at all. Will you answer for this one, not love exactly though it lived in the same country? Will you stand as this one's shield? Will what wounds this one wound you? Will you hold when holding costs and not let go? He felt the question land in Hermione at the same instant it landed in him, felt her stillness beside him as she met it, and he did not hesitate, and neither did she, and the answer they gave was not spoken and did not need to be, because the floor was not listening for words. It was listening for the thing underneath them, and the thing underneath them had been true, Harry realized, for years, and was only now being asked to say its own name. Yes, the room took fire. The cold starlight blazed up white, every constellation at once, and out of the stone hollow rose not one ring but two, turning slowly in the air above the plinth, drawing themselves out of the old signet as though it had only ever been a seed. One was heavy and dark, a lord's ring, the black crest cut deep and proud. Other was finer, the same crest rendered in silver and jet, a lady's ring, and it had not existed anywhere in the world a moment before, because the house had made it now tonight. For a lady it had waited 3 centuries to be allowed to name. The 2 rings turned in the white light, and then they came down, the heavy one to Harry's hand and the fine one to Hermione's, and settled there warm, fitted to the finger with the certainty of a house that had known the shape of their hands before either of them was born. The white light sank back into the silver wire. The constellations dimmed to their worn glow and then to nothing. The house above them let out its long groan in reverse, settling, and every door in number 12, Sirius would tell them later, had swung silently open on its own in that moment, from the cellar to the attic, all at once, the whole grim building unlocking itself for the first time in its history. Harry stood in the dark with the Lord's ring warm on his hand and Hermione's fingers still laced through his, and a slow, steady second heartbeat still faintly there under his own, fading now but not gone, never entirely gone again, and he understood that whatever they had been to each other at the top of the stairs an hour ago, they were something else now, something the oldest magic in Britain had looked at and sealed and called by its true name. "Well," said Sirius into the ringing quiet, and his voice was not entirely steady. "That's that, Lord and Lady Black." He looked at the 2 of them standing in the center of his family's inside-out heaven, and whatever he was carrying he let them see it, just for a moment, before he covered it with the old grin. "My father is spinning so fast in his grave he could power the national grid. I have never in my life been so happy." It was, Harry noted distantly, the only time all month anyone had let themselves say the word. They came up the turning stair into a kitchen full of people who had felt the house move. The Weasleys were on their feet. Molly had one hand pressed to the doorframe and was looking up at the ceiling, where the beams had stopped their ancient settling and gone quiet, and Arthur was turning slowly on the spot with his mouth open, feeling the change in the air as he felt everything, with undisguised delight. Every door in the kitchen stood open. Every door in the house stood open, they would find, top to bottom, and the ones that had been sealed shut since before Sirius was born had opened too, gently, without splintering, the house having simply decided to stop refusing. And Creature had changed. The old elf stood in the middle of the kitchen, and he was straighter than Harry had ever seen him, the perpetual crouch gone out of his spine, and the muttering that had been the constant weather of him had stopped entirely. When Harry and Hermione came off the stair he crossed to them and knelt, both of them at once, without any of the reluctance that had cost him so much a fortnight ago, and when he lifted his great pale face, there was something clear in it that grief and spite had crowded out for 50 years. "The house has a lord and a lady again," he said, and his cracked voice had steadied. "A true one, two true ones." Creature felt the wards change and the doors open and the old locks let go, and Creature's bond turned toward you in the same moment, master mistress, without Creature choosing it, because a house elf's bond goes where the house goes and the house has chosen. He bowed his head. Creature is sorry for the years he was cruel to the mistress before she was the mistress. Creature did not know. The blood was hidden. Creature will not be cruel again. Hermione crouched to his level, which no one had told her she could do, and which made Molly put a hand to her mouth. "Creature, you don't have to earn it back. You're not a thing I hold. You're a person this house owes an apology to, not the other way round." The old elf looked at her as at a sunrise he had been told all his life would never come, and could not speak, and Harry looked away to give him the privacy of it. Later, when the Weasleys had gone home into the early hours with fierce embraces and Molly's threat to return with breakfast, and the house had settled into its new open-doored quiet, Harry found Hermione on the landing outside the drawing room, standing at the window with the lady's ring turning on her finger and the sleeping street below. "I keep waiting to feel different," she said, without turning. "Everyone downstairs was looking at us like something enormous happened, and it did. I felt it. The floor read us. The rings came, and I keep waiting for it to change how I feel, and it hasn't. I feel exactly like myself. I feel like Hermione, who has to go to the bathroom and is worried about her parents and can't stop mentally drafting the letter to the Wisengamot." She turned at last. "Is that wrong? Am I supposed to feel transformed?" "No," Harry said. He came to stand beside her at the glass. "I think that's the whole point of it. It didn't change what we are, it just made it official." He was quiet a moment, the ring warm on his own hand, the second heartbeat gone now from his chest, but the memory of it not gone at all. "You want to know the only thing that actually feels different to me?" "What?" "Down in the cellar, when the floor asked its question, I could feel you, not guess, feel. Your heart beat right there next to mine, slower than mine, steadier." He looked at her. "It's gone now, but I don't think it's gone all the way. I think that's the thing the rite actually did. Not power, not a title. It made it so I'll always be able to find you, wherever you are, however far." He shrugged, awkward with the largeness of the plain fact. "That's the only part that feels different, and it's the only part I'd have asked for." She looked at him for a moment in the dark of the landing, and then she leaned her head on his shoulder, and they stood at the window and watched the sleeping street together, two people who felt exactly like themselves and were nonetheless entirely changed. The consequences arrived before dawn, and they arrived as proof. They had come up out of the cellar into a house that had changed. Every door stood open. The portraits had gone silent in a way that was not sulking but something closer to attention. All of them turned very slightly toward Harry and Hermione as they passed. Even old Mrs. Black's screaming portrait in the hall, which did not scream, which for the first time in living memory watched two people cross beneath it and said nothing at all, its painted mouth working on words it could no longer find the authority to speak. The wards had changed too. Harry could feel them now, which he never had before, a low awareness at the edge of his mind of the shape of the house's protection, of where its walls stood and how far its old defenses reached, and he could feel faintly that Hermione felt it too, that they shared the awareness the way they now shared so much. The Ministry Owl came at first light. It was not gray this time. It was a great horned thing with the seal of the Department of Magical Heritage on a scroll clamped in its talons, and it swept down toward the drawing-room window where they were standing, and it struck the wards. There was a sound like a struck bell and a flare of pale gold, and the owl was turned, not harmed, simply and firmly turned, the whole trajectory of it bent away from the glass as though the air in front of the window had become a hand. It circled and came again, and again the wards turned it, and on the third pass it gave up and settled on the railing across the street and sat there, affronted, the scroll still clamped in its talons, unable to deliver. Hermione was smiling. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a person who has set a trap and watched it work exactly as designed. "That's a custodian's writ," she said. "Look at the seal. That's the freeze, Harry." Malfoy's office moved the moment the contest matured overnight, exactly on schedule. They sent a writ to take administrative control of the House of Black, to freeze the vaults and seal the seat, and it's meant to be served on the property, and it can't be served on the property because the property is warded to the Lord and Lady of the house, and there is no longer any contest for it to attach to. She turned from the window. "You can't freeze a completed investiture. There's nothing to freeze. The seat isn't contested anymore, it's held. That owl is carrying a piece of paper that has, as of about 4 hours ago, no legal object to land on. It'll sit there until it gives up, and then it'll fly back to a very expensive office, and someone in that office is going to have to explain to Lucius Malfoy that the children have already won the thing he was so carefully arranging to steal." Sirius, who had not slept and had reached the giddy clarity that lies on the far side of exhaustion, came to look at the affronted owl with enormous satisfaction. I have wanted to inconvenience the Malfoys my entire life, he said, and it turns out all it took was giving away everything I own. There's a lesson in that. I refuse to learn it. Remus, more soberly, was watching the street. It's proof of something else, too, he said. Lucius knows by now. The freeze failing is as loud as a shout in the right circles. By tonight, everyone who is quietly wondering what happened in Gringotts will know that two 16-year-olds hold the House of Black outright and the Peverell claim besides, and that the first serious move against them bounced off the wards like a thrown stone. He looked at Harry and Hermione. The clever enemy just learned you can't be taken by paperwork. The clever enemy will now stop using paperwork. The clever enemy stopped using paperwork that same night. Harry woke because the wards told him to. He had not known they could. He came up out of sleep with the certain knowledge sitting cold and clear in his mind, put there by the house's magic, that something was standing at the edge of the property that did not belong there, testing the boundary, patient and careful and wrong. He was out of bed and into the corridor before he had decided to move, and Hermione's door was already opening, because she had felt it too, the two of them woken by the same alarm in the same instant, and they went down through the silent open-doored house together without needing to say a word. The thing at the edge of the wards was a man, or had been shaped like one. He stood in the street beyond the railing in the dead hour when the street lamps had given up and he was hooded and still, and he had one gloved hand raised toward the boundary of the property, not touching it, holding it a hair's breadth off, and where his hand hovered the wards showed themselves in the dark as a faint gold lattice straining. He was not trying to break through. Harry understood that at once, the understanding coming up through the house sense the wards had given him. He was mapping. Reading the defenses, learning their shape and their strength as Hermione read a summons slowly from the bottom, hunting the seam. Harry could feel him through the house sense, like a splinter under the skin before you find it, a wrongness pressed against the boundary of everything the cellar had just made his. The wards did not like the touch. Where the gloved hand hovered, the gold lattice thickened and thinned, the house testing the intruder as thoroughly as the intruder tested the house, two careful things taking each other's measure across a line neither would be first to cross. The street was silent, no dog barked, no late cab turned the corner. The whole ordinary world had drawn a breath and held it around this one patient figure and its one raised hand. "Don't open the door," Hermione breathed. Her hand was on his arm. "That's what he wants. He can't get in, so he wants us to come out. Look at how he's standing. He's not attacking the wards, he's advertising to them. He wants us to feel him and come and see." "Then we see," Harry said, "from here." They stood at the window in the dark and watched the hooded figure map their walls, and after a while the figure lowered its hand and turned its hooded face up toward the window where they stood, though there was no possible way it could see them through the wards in the dark, and it inclined its head. A small bow, courteous, the bow of a man acknowledging a thing he has come a long way to look at and found worth the journey. And then it reached into its robe and set something down on the pavement, at the very edge of the wards, gently, the way you set down an offering, and it turned and walked away up the empty street and did not once look back, and it was gone. The thing it had left glowed faintly on the pavement until morning. They did not touch it. Andromeda, when the sun was up and the wards let them approach, crouched over it with her wand and her half-moon spectacles and her surgeon's care, and named it before she picked it up, a message stone old magic, keyed to open only for the hand it was addressed to. It was addressed, when she turned it to the light, to no name at all. It bore instead a symbol cut into its dark surface, worn and simple and unmistakable now that Harry had seen its like once already, on a sealed black door far underground. A wand, a stone, a cloak over both, the triangle, the line, the circle. He signed it with the Peverell mark, Hermione said. She had gone very still over the stone, all her forensic quickness pulled taut. Not the black crest, not a ministry seal, the Peverell mark. "He came to the House of Black, mapped our wards, bowed to us like an equal, and left a message signed with the one name in the world he had no right to sign, because his line curdled and the basin will never sing for him." She looked up and the morning light was on her face, and under the stillness was the thing she would not name. "It's not the ministry anymore, Harry. It's not Malfoy and his custodian and his paperwork. That was the shadow Gornuk warned us about, the third door. He's telling us he knows exactly what we are, and he's telling us he thinks the name is his, and he's telling us he can walk up to our walls in the night and go away again whenever he likes." She stood, leaving the stone where it lay. "He's not frightening us, he's introducing himself." They took it inside, the message stone floating in a jar of Andromeda's conjuring so that no living hand need close on it, and they laid the morning's argument out on the kitchen table where the night's dinner had been, and the House of Black held its council. "It isn't Voldemort," Remus said. He had not slept and it showed, but his mind had the clean edge that came to him near the moon. "That's the first thing, and it matters. Voldemort does not bow. He does not leave calling cards and walk away. If he had stood at your wall in the night, he'd have spent himself trying to bring it down and failed and burned your street for spite. This was a craftsman, someone who came to measure, not to break, someone who wanted you to know he'd been there and wanted you unharmed to know it. An agent, Andromeda said, sent to appraise. There are men who serve the dark and are not the dark, who covet on commission, and they are more dangerous than fanatics, because a fanatic can be provoked into a mistake and a craftsman cannot. She turned the jar, studying the mark through the glass. He signed with the Peverell sign to tell us the shape of his master's interest. His master does not want the black seat. His master could not care less which child holds a chair in the Wisengamot. His master wants the other name, the old one. The one behind the sealed door, and his master has learned, as we have, that the door answers only to the whole line, gathered and willing. Her tired eyes lifted. Which is precisely the two of you. The kitchen went quiet with the weight of it, so he can't open the door himself. Ron had gone home hours ago, and it felt too serious to say the blunt thing, cutting straight to the bone of it. Whoever's behind that mark, he hasn't the blood. The basin won't sing for him, the door won't wake for him. The whole inheritance is locked behind a lock only Harry and Hermione are the key to. He set both hands flat on the table. Which means he doesn't want them dead. Dead heirs can't open a door. He wants them alive and willing, or alive and made willing, and there's only one reason a man like that keeps a key alive. To use it, Hermione said, very quietly. He doesn't want to destroy us, he wants to own us. He wants to stand behind the two people who can open the oldest vault in Britain and make them open it for him. That's worse. That's so much worse than wanting us dead. She looked at the mark in the jar, and the forensic quickness in her had gone somewhere cold and clear. Being wanted dead, you can fight, you put up walls, you strike back, you make yourself too costly to kill. But being wanted as a key, he'll be patient, he'll be gentle. He'll never once come at us in a way we can simply fight, because a broken key opens nothing. He'll come at everything around us instead, the people, the pressure, the slow closing of every door until the only open one leads where he wants us to walk. She lifted her head. He bowed to us, Harry. That wasn't respect. That was a man being careful with something valuable he intends to keep. Harry looked at the faces around the table, the found family the seller had bound him to protect, and then at the mark in the jar and the plan that had been forming in him since the hooded figure turned its face up to a window it could not see through, settled into something hard and certain. Then we don't wait for him to close the doors, he said. We open ours first. He looked at Hermione. Gornuk said there's a time for that black door, and it isn't when we're ready. It's when we've run out of the luxury of not being. That craftsman just told us the clock's running. If the only thing standing between that man and the whole Peverell inheritance is the two of us understanding our half of it before he can arrange to use us, then we'd better understand it fast, and we'd better understand it first, because the one thing worse than opening that door too soon is having it opened for us by someone else's hand on ours. Harry looked down at the mark on the stone, the three brothers' sign left like a calling card at the edge of everything he had just sealed himself to protect, and he felt the Lord's ring warm on his hand, and beside him the second heartbeat that was never quite gone anymore, and he made himself a promise in the cold morning that he did not say out loud. Then we'd better understand our half of that name, he said, before he decides he's finished introducing himself. Gornuk showed us a door. It's time we learned how to open it. Hermione picked up his hand, the one with the ring, and held it, and looked with him at the Peverell mark burning quietly on the stone in the ordinary London morning, and neither of them let go, and above them the great old house that was theirs now stood with all its doors open to the light, wide awake at last and watching the street. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The house of three brothers. Gornuk made them wait 3 days before he would take them to the door, and he made them earn the 3 days. You will not open it, ignorant, he said, when they came to him the morning after the craftsman's visit with the message stone in its jar and the whole of their resolve behind them. I have watched wizards open old things they did not understand, and I have swept up what was left of them, and I have written the careful lines in the ledgers that record where they were buried. You are not ignorant children. You have a right keeper's respect, which is a thing I have given to perhaps 4 humans in a life longer than your grandmother's grandmothers combined. I will not spend that respect burying you, so 3 days. You will read what we have, and you will come to that door knowing what the 3 brothers were, and not what the stories made them, and then, if you still wish it, I will show you how to ask the stone to wake. What they had was not much, because almost nothing survived, and what survived was suspect, and Hermione spent the 3 days doing the thing she did best, which was to lay a legend on the table and dissect it until it confessed. Everyone knows the story, she said on the second night in the library that was theirs now, with a dozen open books held flat and the message stone glowing faintly in its jar on the mantel where they could keep an eye on it. 3 brothers, a river too deep to cross, a bridge they made by magic. Death, cheated of 3 travelers, meets them on the bridge and pretends to congratulate them and offers each a prize. The eldest asks for an unbeatable wand and is murdered for it in his sleep. The middle asks for a stone to bring back the dead and is driven to his grave by a longing he could not truly answer. The youngest, the wise one, asks for a way to leave without being followed, and Death gives him a cloak, and the youngest wears it all his long life, and when he is old he takes it off and gives it to his son and greets Death as an old friend and goes with him gladly and equal on his own 2 feet. She turned a page. That's the tale. Children's book. Death with a scythe and a grudge. And it's wrong, or at least it's a costume, and I think I know what's underneath it, and I think it's the whole reason your enemy is so hungry, and I think it's the whole reason the goblins are so wary." "Go on," Harry said. He had learned that the best thing to do when Hermione arrived somewhere was to hold the door. The wand, the stone, the cloak. Everyone reads them as 3 prizes, 3 tools, 3 cheat codes for beating death. She held up 3 fingers and folded them down one at a time. Power over others, power over the dead, power over being found. That's how coveter reads them, because a coveter only has one language in its ownership, but read the outcomes instead of the objects. The brother who wanted power over others died by it. The brother who wanted power over the dead died of it. And the brother who wanted none of it, who only wanted to walk his own life unhunted and then leave it with dignity, lived long and died well, and passed the one true thing down to his children. She lowered her hand. "The Hallows aren't a toolkit for conquering death, Harry. They're a test disguised as a reward. And the whole point of the test is that everyone who tries to master death fails, and the only one who inherits anything real is the one who understood that death isn't a thing you master. It's a thing you steward, a threshold you keep, and the Peverells weren't 3 brothers who tricked death on a bridge. I think they were the first keepers of the threshold, and the story of the bridge is what's left after 800 years of people who could only understand keeping as owning." The message stone on the mantel pulsed once softly as she finished, as if the old sign cut into it had heard its own name spoken correctly for the first time in a long while, and both of them looked at it, and it went still. "You should tell Gornuk that," Harry said quietly. "I did, this afternoon." She closed the book. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "On the 3rd day come to the door," which from Gornuk is the loudest possible applause. She rubbed her eyes. "It's tomorrow, Harry. Tomorrow we go down and I ask a stone that's been sealed for 8 centuries to wake up because we finally understand it isn't a treasure. And if I'm wrong about what it is, we'll find out at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible place, in front of the one door in Britain no goblin has ever opened." "You're not wrong," Harry said. "You can't know that." "No," he agreed. "But I've watched you be right about impossible things for 5 years, and I've watched you be uncertain about them the whole way, and the uncertainty has never once meant you were wrong. It's just the tax you pay for being careful." He reached over and closed the book she was still gripping. "Sleep. Tomorrow we go and meet the family." The black door was exactly as he remembered it, which surprised him, because everything else had grown so much larger. They came down through the hall of blood and ink and along the uncarved passage, the 2 of them and Gornuk, and this time no one else, because Gornuk had said the door would wake for the line, and the line alone, and that witnesses were a luxury the threshold did not permit. Sirius had not liked that. Sirius had said several things about it at volume and had been overruled by Andromeda, who understood old magic, and by Hermione, who had read the rite, and in the end he had gripped Harry hard by both shoulders at the top of the goblin stair and said, "Come back up, that's the whole instruction. Whatever's behind that door, whatever it offers you, whatever it costs, come back up. I've buried enough family, come back up," and Harry had promised and meant it and gone down. Now the door stood before them, seamless black stone, the 3 brothers' sign worn smooth at its heart, and the passage was so quiet Harry could hear the blood in his own ears. "There is no blade this time," Gornuk said. "No basin. The reading rites want your blood because blood is what proves. This is not a reading rite. This is a threshold, and a threshold does not want to know what you are. It wants to know whether you understand where you are standing." He stepped back all the way back to the mouth of the passage and folded his long hands. "I can take you no further. No goblin has ever stood where you are about to stand. Put your hands on the sign, both of you together, one hand each, and then do not ask it to open. That is the mistake every wizard makes, and it is why the door has never opened. Do not command it. Do not want it. Tell it instead the true thing your girl found in the books. Tell it you know what it keeps. And then let it decide whether you are telling the truth." Harry looked at Hermione. She had gone pale in the blue underlight of the passage, and her hand, when he took it, was cold, and he did not let go of it until the last moment, until they stood together before the black stone with the worn sign at the height of both their chests. "Together," she said. "Together," he said. They laid their hands on the sign, his over the wand and the stone, hers over the cloak that covered them, their fingers overlapping at the center where the circle was, and Harry felt the stone under his palm, cold and old and utterly still, waiting, and he understood that Gornuk was right, that everything in him wanted to push, to ask, to make it open, and that the wanting was exactly the thing the door had been refusing for 800 years. So he did not want it. He made himself go still under the cold stone, and he thought about a man who had worn a cloak all his long life and then taken it off and greeted death as an old friend, and he said aloud into the dark, not a command and not a plea, "We know what you are. You're not a prize, you're not a weapon, you're a threshold, and someone has to keep it, and the last people who understood that have been gone a long time." His voice came steadier than he felt. "We're not here to master anything. We're here because the keeping came to us and we didn't ask for it, and we're not going to run from it. We know what you keep. Let us in or don't, but we're not going to lie to you to make you open." For a long moment nothing happened, and the cold of the stone crept up through his fingers, and beside him Hermione's breath was quiet and even, and he thought, "It hasn't worked. She's going to be so annoyed that she was right about the risk and I was right about her," and then the sign woke under both their hands. It was the color he had no name for, the seam between amber and blue, and it did not blaze. It bloomed. It came out of the worn sign slowly, warm against his palm, and it spread outward across the black stone along lines he had not been able to see until they lit, an entire geometry hidden in the seamless face of the door, circles within circles, a diagram older than any rune Hermione could name. And where the light reached the edges of the door, the seamless stone was not seamless after all, had never been a wall. Had only been a door pretending to be a wall until someone stood before it who understood the difference. It did not swing, it did not grind. It simply, between one breath and the next, was open, and beyond it there was not a vault. Beyond it there was a place. They stepped through together, and the passage and the goblin and the cold blue underlight fell away behind them, and they stood at the edge of a chamber that had no business fitting inside a hill. It was vast in the way of cathedrals, but no cathedral had ever been lit like this. The light came from the walls themselves, from a pale stone that held its own soft glow, the color of the moon 3 nights before it is full, and it fell on a floor of the same stone worked in the great triangular sign so wide that Harry and Hermione stood, without having planned it, one at the base and one at the point. The air was cool and clean and carried the green mineral smell he had come to know, but stronger, and under it something else, something he could only think of as the smell of a held breath, the particular stillness of a room where something important has been waiting a very long time and is not surprised now that you have come. There was no gold, there were no jewels, there was nothing a coveter would have crossed the road for. There was only the vast pale glowing chamber, and at its center, where the 3 lines of the great sign met, a single low plinth of dark stone, and on the plinth, folded, ordinary, unremarkable, a cloak. Harry knew the cloak, he had owned it since he was 11. It was upstairs in his trunk at Grimmauld Place at this exact moment, and it was also here, folded on a plinth at the heart of a chamber that had been sealed for 800 years, and both of those things were true, and he stopped where he stood and could not make his feet go forward. "It's your cloak," Hermione whispered. She had stopped too. "Harry, it's your invisibility cloak. It's here. How is it? It isn't." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, warm and unhurried and old past the reckoning of years, and it carried no menace at all, which was itself the most remarkable thing about it. "That is not the cloak your boy carries in his trunk, daughter of my brother's brother. That is the shape the threshold wears when the line comes home, because the cloak was the truest of the 3, and so the keeping shows you its truest face. Your cloak is real. This is more than real. Do not trouble to understand the difference tonight. You have understood enough already to be standing here, which is more than I dared hope, across all these long-sealed years." A figure had come to stand beside the plinth. It was not solid, and it was not a ghost, not the pearled translucence of the Hogwarts dead. It was made of the same pale glow as the walls, a man shaped out of the chamber's own light, tall and lean and unbearably calm, and though its face was not distinct, Harry had the sense of great age worn lightly, of humor that had survived everything humor can be asked to survive. "You're Ignatus," Hermione said, "the youngest brother. I am what the keeping remembers of him." The figure inclined its head. A voice the threshold wears to speak with its heirs, because a threshold has no mouth of its own, and the youngest brother left it the shape of his. "Call me Ignatus if it comforts you. It comforts me. I have not been called anything in a very long time." The chamber seemed to lean in as the figure spoke, the pale light of the walls brightening a fraction, as if the whole vast room were a single instrument, and the voice were the hand that had finally touched its strings. Harry looked up into the dark that swallowed the top of the chamber and could not find a ceiling, and understood that there might not be one, that this was not a room so much as a held idea, a place the keeping made real for as long as its heirs stood inside it and dreamed no ceiling into being. The pale stone underfoot was warm now, faintly, the warmth of a thing that has waited a long time for company and is glad in its slow mineral way of the weight of 2 living people at last. There was no dust here, though nothing had entered in 800 years. There was no decay. The chamber had simply held itself, patient and whole and lit from within, keeping faith with a line that had almost forgotten it existed, and the sheer fidelity of it, the 8 unbroken centuries of a room refusing to fall dark against all likelihood of anyone ever coming, was the thing that finally undid the last of Harry's composure, so that he had to look down at his own hands for a moment before he could trust his face again. The light of it moved, and it was looking at them both, at the 2 of them standing at the base and the point of the great sign. "Sit. There is nowhere to sit, and you are children, and you have been very brave, and I would not have you brave standing up. Sit on the floor of my brother's house. It is cleaner than any floor above, and it has been lonely, and it would like the weight of you." They sat because there was nothing else in the world to do, cross-legged on the glowing stone with the plinth and its cloak between them and the figure of light, and the vast pale chamber held them, and the held breath of 8 centuries let itself, at last, a little out. "You have the story wrong," Ignatus said, "as everyone does, and your girl has it less wrong than anyone in 800 years, and I want to give her the rest of it because she earned it in your library and I watched her earn it, and it was the finest thing I have seen from behind this door since the door was shut." You watched us, Harry said. The threshold reaches where the line goes, not far, not clearly. But when your girl stood in a room of books and said keeping, not owning, the whole of this chamber turned over in its sleep, and I woke, and I have been waiting 3 days to tell her she is right. The figure settled, light on light. So, the three brothers, we were not princes and we did not trick death on a bridge, though there was a river and there was a bridge, and we did make it because we were clever and proud and young, and the making of impossible bridges is what the clever and proud and young are for. But death did not come to us as a cheated enemy. Death came to us as what death is, which is not a person with a grudge and a scythe. Death is the threshold, the door between the lit room and the dark one. It has always needed keeping because a door that no one keeps is a door that anyone may prop open or nail shut, and both of those are worse than you can imagine, and both of those are what happens when the keeping fails. The light dimmed and brightened, a slow tide. Death did not give us weapons. Death gave us the keeping, divided into three to see which of us understood it. My eldest brother took the part of the keeping that is authority, the wand, the power to compel the threshold, and he thought authority meant he could rule the door, and the door does not suffer rulers, and it took him. My middle brother took the part of the keeping that is mercy, the stone, the power to call across the threshold, and he thought mercy meant he could reopen what had closed, and the door does not suffer that either, because a threshold propped open is not a mercy, it is a wound, and it took him too, gently, but it took him. The figure was quiet a moment, and I took the part that is humility, the cloak. The power to pass the threshold unseen and unhurried, to walk one's own life to its own end without hastening it and without fleeing it, and to hand the keeping on when the time came to the next pair of clean hands and step through myself on my own feet and equal. That is not a costume for cowardice. That is the whole of the keeping in one object, and it is why the cloak was the only hallow that was never lost and never fought over and never soaked in anyone's blood, because humility cannot be stolen. It can only be inherited by someone who already has it. Harry looked at the folded cloak on the plinth, the plainest object in the vast glowing room, and felt the size of what he was being told settle into him slowly, the way cold water fills a boot. Then what is this? Hermione said softly. This chamber, if it isn't a treasure and it isn't a weapon, what did you leave here for whoever came home? I left the keeping itself, Ignatus said, not an object. Not a spell you can carry out in your hands and lose, a knowing. When the line came home, whole and willing and understanding, the threshold would give its heirs the keeping, so that the door would have keepers again after all the long centuries it had none. The figure of light rose and held out its shining hands, one toward Harry, one toward Hermione, across the plinth and the cloak. That is what I am offering you, not power over death, the opposite of it. The care of a door and the weight of a door and the awe of standing at the one place where the lit room meets the dark and being the ones who keep it honest. It will not make you unkillable. It will not raise your dead. It will make you, the two of you together, the keepers of the threshold, which is the oldest and heaviest and most beautiful trust the world has to give, and which the world has been without for 800 years. The shining hands stayed open, offered unforced. I will not take it from you, and I cannot put it upon you. That is the last mercy of the keeping and the reason it has never been stolen. You have to choose it, both of you together, now, with your eyes open, knowing it will make you a light that certain hungry things in the dark have been starving toward for centuries. The message of the craftsman's bow came back to Harry then, the courteous inclination of a man being careful with something valuable. This was the thing the hungry things were starving toward. Not a wand, not a weapon, this. He looked at Hermione across the pale glowing stone, across the plinth, across the folded cloak that was the humility of a man 800 years dead, and he did not say anything because they had passed the place where they needed to say things aloud, and she looked back at him, and he felt, faint and steady, the second heartbeat wake again under his own, her heart keeping its slower time beside his in the held-breath stillness of the oldest room in Britain. Yes, her heartbeat said without her mouth moving. Yes, together, all the way down. Yes, said his. They reached across the plinth, over the cloak, and took the shining offered hands. The keeping came into them like dawn. It did not hurt, and it did not blaze, and it was nothing at all like the wild white fire of the black investiture. It came slowly, the way morning comes to a valley, filling the low places first and then rising, and Harry felt it fill him. A vast quiet awareness of the door he had never been able to see and now would never be able to unsee. The threshold that ran under everything, under the whole lit world, the place where the room he was standing in met the room he could not yet enter, and he understood, with the keeping in him, that it was not a thing to fear. It was a thing to keep. It was already being kept by the two of them together, the weight of it shared so evenly that neither of them buckled, because that was the whole design. That was why it had waited 800 years for two and not one, because the keeping was too heavy for a single pair of hands and too precious to divide. And so it had waited, patient as stone, for a pair who would carry it between them without either trying to hold it alone. And Harry understood, as the dawn of it filled him, why every part of this inheritance had insisted on two. The blood had insisted, refusing to be read in one hand alone. The black rite had insisted, making a lady's ring where none had existed. The sealed door had insisted, stirring only when the line stood whole before it. All of it, every ancient stubborn piece of it, had been reaching across 800 years toward this exact moment, when the keeping would need not a hero but a pair, and would find, waiting, two people who had already learned, without any magic telling them to, how to carry a heavy thing between them and never let the other take too much of the weight. It was not that the magic had chosen them because they were partners. It was that the magic could only ever have chosen partners, and they were simply the first pair in 8 centuries to arrive already knowing how to be one. Harry felt the truth of it settle alongside the keeping, and the two settled together, and he could not have said afterward which of them had steadied him more. When it was done, the figure of light was fainter, and the chamber was dimmer, and the folded cloak on the plinth was gone, though whether it had ever been there Harry could no longer have said. "It is done," Ignatius said, and his voice was thinning now, the threshold spending the last of the shape it had worn. "The door has keepers again, the world has keepers again, though the world will never know it, which is as it should be, because the keeping is not for the world's gratitude, it is for the world's good, and those are not the same thing, and a keeper who forgets the difference becomes my eldest brother. The light of him was going. 2 things, before I am only a door again. First is a gift, and the second is a warning, and I am sorry that I have more of the second than the first, but I have been watching the world through a keyhole for 8 centuries, and the second is the truer." "Tell us," Hermione said, her voice shook but only a little. "The gift. You will always find each other now, across any distance, through any dark, behind any door but the last one. The keeping runs between you, and it will not let one of you be lost while the other lives and looks. Use it well. It is the kindest thing my brother's house has left to give." The light gathered itself for the last of it, and the warning: "There is a thing in your world, in this very age, that has spent its whole unnatural life trying to do what my middle brother did and my eldest, both at once, to rule the threshold and to reopen it, to compel death and to escape it. It has torn itself into pieces to do it, and hidden the pieces, and it does not know, it cannot know, being what it is, that the threshold cannot be ruled and cannot be cheated, that everything it has done has only propped the door and nailed it in turn, and made of itself the exact wound the keeping exists to heal." The figure was almost gone, a suggestion of light on the pale stone. "It descends, distantly, from my middle brother. It carries a splinter of the same blood you carry. And when you took up the keeping just now, it felt it. Wherever it is, whatever is left of it, it felt the threshold wake and find keepers at last, and it will understand in its ruined way that the door it has been trying to force has just been locked by the only hands that could ever truly lock it. It will come for you, not to kill you. It is past wanting anything so simple. It will come to make you open what you have just been made to keep. Do not let it. That is the whole of the keeping, children, in 5 words. Do not let it. Guard the door." The light went out. The chamber was ordinary stone, dim and cool and silent, and there was no plinth and no cloak and no figure, only the two of them sitting cross-legged on a floor worked with a great triangular sign, holding hands across the empty center, in a room that had given them everything it had and gone back to being only a room. They did not speak on the long climb up. There was nothing to say that the silence was not saying better, and Harry held Hermione's hand the whole way, and felt the second heartbeat steady beside his own, the gift already working, already refusing to let him lose her in the dark. Gornuk was waiting at the mouth of the passage, and when he saw their faces he did a thing Harry would remember for the rest of his life. He bowed, not the courteous inclination of the craftsman, not the servant's bend of creature. He went down on one knee, the old rite keeper who had knelt to no wizard in a life longer than empires, and he bowed his silver head to the floor before the two of them, and he said in the deep voice that came up from below his chest, "Keepers of the threshold. The door has been shut 800 years, and I have kept the passage before it my whole life, and my father before me, and we did not know what we were keeping the passage to, only that it was holy. And now I know. I am the last goblin who will ever kneel to a wizard, and I do it gladly, and I will deny it, and no one who is not here will ever believe it." He rose. "Come up. There is a great deal of trouble waiting for you in the light, and it has been arriving while you were below, and you will want to face it having eaten." The trouble was waiting in the marble hall, and it wore a ministry cloak, and it had a writ, and behind it, in the shadow of the great brass doors, stood a hooded figure that did not move and did not speak, and inclined its head once courteously to the 2 young people coming up out of the earth with the light of the threshold still on them. The ministry man was soft and pink and beautifully pressed, and he had the professional warmth of someone who had never once meant it. "Lord Black, Lady Black. What a very great pleasure. Cuthbert Beckwith, Department of Magical Heritage. I do apologize for the intrusion upon your banking, but the department has become aware of certain claims, extraordinary claims, if I may say, quite thrilling ones, regarding a dormant lineage, and where dormant lineages of the ancient class are concerned, the department has a statutory duty of oversight, and I am afraid I must ask the 2 of you to accompany me to submit the claim for formal." "No," Hermione said. Beckwith's warmth did not slip because it was painted on. "I don't think you quite. I understand you perfectly, Mr. Beckwith, which is why I said no." She had come up out of the earth carrying the keeping of the world's oldest door, and it was in her voice now, under the sharpness, a new weight that made the soft pink man take half a step back before he caught himself. "You've come to serve a heritage oversight writ on a claim you're calling dormant. It isn't dormant. It was completed by rite 4 days ago and witnessed and sealed at Gringotts, which makes it a fact, and the Department of Magical Heritage has no statutory duty of oversight over facts. You know this. Your writ names the House of Black, and the House of Black is held outright uncontested by the two people standing in front of you, and you've just watched a custodian's freeze bounce off our wards, so you know that too. She did not raise her voice, she lowered it. So let's not pretend this is about Black, you're here about the other name. The one your writ is very carefully not printing, because the moment the Department of Magical Heritage puts the word Peverell on a piece of official parchment, it has admitted the name exists, and the last thing your master wants is that name made real in the public record before he's decided who gets to own it. She tilted her head. Which master is it today, Mr. Beckwith? The one who signs your salary or the one standing behind you in the hood? The soft pink man's mouth opened and shut and no words came out of it, and into the silence the hooded figure by the great brass doors finally spoke. You may go, Beckwith, it said. The voice was low and cultured and entirely without cruelty, which was worse than cruelty, a voice that had never needed to raise itself because it had never once been refused. You have delivered your paper. It has failed. That is not your fault. It was always going to fail. My employer sends bureaucrats first as a courtesy, so that the people he is interested in understand that the courteous path was offered and closed before the other paths open. Beckwith went quickly, his pressed cloak snapping at the brass doors, and then it was the four of them in the vast cold hall, Harry, Hermione, the silent watchful tellers on their high stools, and the hooded man who had stood at their wall in the night. You bowed to us, Harry said, in the street. And again just now, why do you keep bowing to people you've come to threaten? Because I have not come to threaten you. The figure did not move from the shadow of the doors. Threats are for men who lack the patience to wait, and I have been asked to be patient, and I am very good at it. I have come to introduce two ideas and then to leave, and to let the ideas do their slow work, which is how the best work is always done. The hood inclined. The first idea is that my employer knows what you did downstairs just now. Do not ask how. He knew the moment it was done, felt it wake across the whole of the country, the way one feels a bell rung in a distant valley. He has been waiting for that bell for a very long time, longer than you have been alive, longer in the ways that matter than anyone has been alive. The voice warmed a degree, and the warmth was the coldest thing in the room. The second idea is that he does not wish you harm. I know that is difficult to believe, standing where you stand, having felt me at your wall, but it is the simple truth. A key is of no use to a man who breaks it. He wishes you well. He wishes you long-lived and healthy and in the fullness of time reasonable. Because the thing you now keep is a thing he has wanted his entire long existence, and he has learned at very great cost that it cannot be taken. It can only be opened by its keepers willingly. The hood turned toward Hermione. You understand this already. I saw it in your face when you told the pink man about the record. You are the cleverest thing to walk into this hall in a century, and you have already worked out that the danger to you is not death. Say it. It will do you good to hear yourself say it aloud, and it will do me good to know I am understood. The danger is that you'll be patient, Hermione said. Her voice did not shake, though it cost her. That you won't come at us in any way we can fight. That you'll spend years being gentle and reasonable and courteous, closing every door around us one at a time, until the only open one leads where he wants us to walk. That you'll wait for us to be tired or frightened or cornered, and then offer us the reasonable thing, the thing that keeps everyone we love safe, and all we have to do to buy it is open a door. She lifted her chin. And you think I've worked that out and been made afraid by it. I have worked it out. But you've made a mistake about the second part, and it's the same mistake your master made 800 years ago on a bridge, and it's the mistake his whole line makes, and it's the only reason the door has keepers now and never had them before. She reached out without looking and took Harry's hand, and the Lord's ring and the lady's ring caught the cold marble light. He thinks the keeping is a thing one person holds and can be pressured into giving up. It isn't. It's held between two, and the whole design of it is that neither of us can open it alone, and neither of us can be made to open it while the other refuses, and neither of us envoy will ever refuse the other and never has, not once, in 5 years of exactly the kind of pressure your master imagines is new. You've come to threaten a lock. We're not a lock. We're two people who chose each other in front of the oldest magic in Britain, and it believed us, and that is a door your master will never, ever open, because he has never once in his whole ruined existence understood the only key that fits it. The hooded figure was still for a long moment. That, it said at last softly, is either the bravest thing I have heard said in this hall or the most naive, and I have lived long enough to know that those are frequently the same sentence, and that time is the only judge that can tell them apart. My employer has a great deal of time, so it seems to you being young. Stepped back into deeper shadow, gathering itself to go. I will carry your answer to him faithfully. He will be pleased. He does not want an easy thing. An easy thing would not be worth the waiting. Guard your door, keepers. Guard it well and guard it long, and guard everyone who stands near it, because doors are opened in the end not by force upon the lock, but by grief brought to the ones who hold the key. The hood inclined a final time. Give my regards to your godfather. Such a large family for two people with so much to protect. It must keep you up at night, the arithmetic of it. It would keep me up. Good day. And it was gone out through the great brass doors into the ordinary noise of Diagon Alley, and it did not hurry, and it did not look back. Harry stood in the cold hall with Hermione's hand in his and the keeping new and heavy in his chest, and he did not let go of her, and behind them the goblins on their high stools had all, without a single exception, stopped their work and turned to watch the doors close. He threatened them, Harry said, at the end, the family. He didn't threaten us at all the whole time, he threatened them. I know, Hermione's hand tightened on his. That's the move, Harry. That was him telling us the move, courteously in advance, because he's certain enough of it that warning us costs him nothing. He can't force the lock, so he'll come for the people we'd open it to protect. She turned to him, and the light of the threshold was still faint on her face, and under a tautness she would not name there was the clear cold steadiness that had never once let him down. Which means the very first thing we do before anything else, before we learn a single new thing about the keeping, is we make the people we love impossible to reach. All of them. Sirius, the Weasleys, my parents, Andromeda, Remus, every single one. We build them walls before he builds us grief. She drew a breath. He gave us the map to the whole war just now because he thought showing it to us would frighten us into surrender. He's about to find out it did the opposite. You don't hand Hermione Granger a map and expect her not to read the whole thing and start planning. Despite everything, in the cold marble hall with the oldest keeping in the world newly on his shoulders and a patient, courteous monster loosed into the summer street, Harry felt the corner of his mouth turn. No, he agreed, you really don't. They went up the marble steps together and out into the ordinary gold afternoon, where Sirius was already waiting at the top with his wand loose in his hand and his eyes on the crowd, having felt in the way family does that something had come near the people he loved, and the three of them walked home together into a city that did not know it had keepers now, and did not know it had ever needed them, and would never, if the two of them did their work well, have any cause to learn. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The Coveter's Gambit. They spent a week building walls, and the envoy let them, which told Hermione everything she needed to know about what was coming. He's not stopping us, she said on the sixth night, standing in the drawing room over a map of Britain she had covered in her own colored inks, the safe places in green and the exposed ones in red, and the movements of the people they loved in careful pencil arrows between. That's the thing I can't stop turning over. He warned us he'd come for the family, and then he gave us a week to move them, and he hasn't lifted a finger to prevent it. Kingsley got my parents to the Tonks house without a single owl going astray. Molly's warded the burrow to Andromeda's specifications. Every person on this map is behind stone now, and the envoy watched us do all of it, and he did nothing. She set down her pen. You don't give your enemy a free week unless the week is part of the plan. He's not letting us fortify the family because he's kind. He's letting us fortify the family because he's already decided the family isn't where he's going to strike, and he wants us to spend our week and our worry pointing the wrong direction. Then where? Harry was cleaning his glasses on his shirt, which he did when he was thinking, and put them back on to find her already looking at him. If not the family, where's the strike? At the claim. She turned the map over, and on the back was a second diagram, this one all in black, a thing she had built from the law books Andromeda had brought in the Heir statutes and the Wisengamot procedure that no sane 16-year-old had ever read for pleasure. This came by owl this morning. I didn't show you before dinner because I wanted to understand it first. She slid a heavy cream envelope across the table. It's a challenge, Harry. A formal one filed in the Wisengamot, not the Department of Heritage this time, the full court. Lucius Malfoy and 4 allied houses, and it's clever, it's so clever I almost admire it. They're not contesting the black investiture anymore. They learned that lesson at the wards. They're contesting me. Harry read it slowly, and the cold of it came up off the parchment. They want to void your claim on the grounds that a Muggle-born cannot inherit an ancient house. Her voice was flat and precise, which was how he knew she had already done her weeping about it somewhere he had not been meant to see. There's a statute, old, unrepealed, unenforced for 200 years because it never came up, because the situation it describes has never once existed until me, the Selwyn provision. It says the seat of an ancient and noble house may pass only through blood recognized by the wizarding registry at birth, and I was registered at birth as Muggle-born, because nobody knew, because Antioch hid his daughter so well that the registry that was supposed to catch the blood never caught mine. They're going to argue that the registry's word at birth outranks the goblin's right, that a bank cannot overturn the ministry's own record, and that therefore whatever my blood is, my claim is void, because the paper says I'm nobody. She looked up. And if my claim is void, then the joining right is void, because the joining right needs 2 heirs of the 2 houses, and I'm legally not one. And if the joining right is void, then the black seat drifts back to contested, and the Peverell inheritance has no lawful keeper, and everything we sealed comes unsealed, and Draco Malfoy is Lord Black by autumn, and the door has no keepers, and the envoy's master can begin again with a claimant he can actually control. The drawing room was quiet. The message stone glowed on the mantel in its jar. That's the strike, Harry said, not the family, the paperwork. He gave us a week to guard the wrong thing. That's the strike. She squared the challenge on the table. "And it's brilliant and it's cold and it uses the oldest weapon they have, which is a law written by people who thought blood was destiny to prove that the wrong sort of person could never really belong. And they've made one mistake, Harry, exactly one, and it's the same mistake they always make, and I intend to make them regret it in open court." Her chin came up. "They think the law is theirs. They think because they wrote it and they've always used it, it belongs to them. But a law doesn't belong to the people who wield it. It belongs to whoever reads it most carefully. And nobody in that entire court has read the Selwyn provision more carefully than the Muggle-born girl whose whole life it was written to keep out." She almost smiled. "They handed me a 200-year-old law and expected me to be afraid of it. I'm going to take it apart in front of them." In a cold drawing room 100 miles north, Lucius Malfoy was having the same conversation from the other side and enjoying it a great deal less. "The challenge will fail," the envoy said. He stood by the tall, dark windows of Malfoy Manor with his hood down for once, and his face was unremarkable, which was the most remarkable thing about it, the face of a clerk or a schoolmaster, a face designed to be forgotten. "You know it will fail. I know it will fail. The girl will find the second clause because she finds everything and she will read it aloud and your allies will look foolish and you will lose a little standing you cannot afford to lose. I want you to understand that I know all of this so that you do not think me a fool for asking you to file it anyway." Lucius turned his glass in his long fingers. "Then why file it? Because a man watching for the visible hand does not watch for the other one." The envoy did not turn from the window. "Your challenge is not meant to win, Lucius. It is meant to be watched. It is meant to gather every eye in Britain into one stone room on one afternoon, the two children's above all, and to hold them there, arguing, certain they are fighting the real battle, while the real battle happens somewhere they are not looking and cannot reach in time." He was quiet a moment. "You dislike this. I can see you disliking it. You have spent your life playing for the visible hand, for seats and standing and the good opinion of men who despise you, and you have never once understood that the visible hand is only ever the distraction. It is why you will die rich and small. My employer plays only the other hand. It is why he does not die at all. And when it fails," Lucius said cold, "when the girl reads her clause and the court apologizes to her and my houses look like fools, what do I tell them? What have I bought with my standing?" The envoy finally turned, and his forgettable face wore its courteous nothing of an expression. "You will have bought an afternoon," he said. "You will not know what it was spent on, and it is safer for you not to. Console yourself with this, Lucius. When it is done, when my employer holds what he has waited his whole existence to hold, the men who mattered in the old world will not matter at all, and the only thing that will keep a family alive is having been useful early to the one who won. You are being useful, be grateful. Very few are offered the chance, and fewer still are clever enough to take it." He drew his hood up, and the forgettable face vanished into shadow. "File the challenge, lose it beautifully. And do not, under any circumstances, ask me what the other hand is doing. You will hear about it soon enough, and you will be glad then that your fingerprints are only on the part that failed." The days before the hearing were spent moving the last of the family and reading the last of the law, and Harry did more of the first while Hermione did more of the second, which suited them both. He went with Kingsley to fetch the Grangers, and it was, of everything that strange summer had asked of him, the thing he had dreaded most because he had never met them, and because everything he had to tell them was true and none of it was small. They were exactly what Hermione had made them sound, and nothing like what he had braced for. A tall, quiet man with his daughter's stubborn jaw, and a brisk, kind woman with his daughter's exact way of interrupting a sentence to correct its facts. And they sat in their tidy suburban kitchen with its magnets on the refrigerator and its calendar full of ordinary appointments, and listened to a 16-year-old boy explain that their daughter was the heir of 2 ancient bloodlines, and that men who wanted what she was might come for them to reach her. Mr. Granger was quiet for a while when Harry had finished. Then he said, "She wrote to us about the bank and the ring. She left the dangerous parts out, I think, to spare us. She's been sparing us since she was 11. He looked at his wife. "We always knew she'd gone somewhere we couldn't follow. The first time she came home able to do things, you make a kind of peace with it. You decide the world she's in is bigger than the one you can protect her in, and you love her across the gap, and you hope the people over there are worth her." He looked back at Harry, and his eyes were very steady. "Are you, the people over there, are you worth her?" "No," Harry said, because it was the honest answer and they were honest people. "But I'd die before I let anything happen to her, and I think that has to count for something, even if it isn't worth." Mrs. Granger got up and packed a bag without another word, and as she passed Harry she stopped and put her hand flat against the side of his face for a moment, the way a mother does, which no one had ever once done to him, and said, "She writes about you, you know, between the lines where she thinks we can't read. We can read." And then she went to pack, and Harry stood in the ordinary kitchen with the ghost of a hand on his cheek and could not, for a moment, remember how to breathe evenly. That night back at Grimmauld, he found Hermione asleep at the war table with her cheek on the open statute book and the lady's ring loose on her finger, and he stood in the doorway a while and did not wake her, because she had not slept properly in days and the hearing was close and she needed it, and because there was something in the sight of her, fierce and exhausted and surrounded by the law she was going to use to save herself, that he wanted to keep. He fetched a blanket and put it over her shoulders and turned the lamp down, and she stirred and said his name without opening her eyes, a question, and he said, "I'm here, go back to sleep," and she did, and he sat down across the table in the low light and kept watch over her and the message stone both until morning, and it was, he thought, the most useful thing he had done all week. The Wisengamot chamber was a well of stone, tier on tier of plum-robed witches and wizards rising into shadow, and at the bottom of the well, where the light was worst, were 2 chairs for the parties to a challenge, and Harry and Hermione took them together while the court settled and murmured and looked down at the 2 children who had troubled the oldest families in Britain. Sirius sat in the black seat high in the tiers, restored to it for the day by his own hand for exactly this purpose, in formal plum with the black crest at his throat, and he looked, Harry thought, like a man who had spent his whole life being told he was the disappointment of an ancient house and had finally found a use for the house worth the disappointment. Andromeda sat beside him. Across the well in the challengers' seats, Lucius Malfoy was pale and elegant and perfectly still, and he did not look at Harry at all. He looked at Hermione, and his look was not hatred, which Harry could have answered, but something worse and more patient, the appraising boredom of a man examining a stain he intends to have removed. The chief warlock read the challenge. The Selwyn provision was entered. And then a Malfoy advocate, silver-tongued and unhurried, rose and spent 40 minutes making the case that a registry entry made at a squalling infant's birth must outrank the superstitions of goblins, and that to rule otherwise was to let a bank rewrite the ministry's records at will, and that the Wisengamot's whole authority rested on the principle that its word, once written, was the word, and Harry watched the tears nod. Watched the old families lean toward the comfort of a law that told them what they had always wished to believe, and felt the cold certainty that they were losing. Then the chief warlock called Hermione to answer, and she rose, and she did not go to the speaking stone in the center of the well. She stayed by her chair, close to Harry, and she spoke from there quietly so that the whole vast court had to lean in and go silent to hear her, which was the first thing she did to them, and it was deliberate, and it worked. "The advocate," she said, "has made a beautiful argument, and I want to begin by agreeing with the heart of it. He says the Wisengamot's authority rests on the principle that its written word, once made, is the word. He's right, that is the principle. I'm going to hold him to it." She lifted the heavy old statute book, opened to a page she had marked, the Selwyn provision. Entered into law in 1798 and never repealed, and the challengers are correct that it binds this court, because a law unrepealed is a law in force, and this court does not get to ignore the words it wrote merely because they've become inconvenient. So let's read the words it wrote, all of them, including the ones the advocate did not read to you, which is the second clause, which the challengers are hoping very much that you will not ask me about. A stir went through the tiers. The provision says, Hermione read, that the seat of an ancient house may pass only through blood recognized by the registry. And then it says in clause 2, the same sentence, the part where the challengers stopped reading at the comma, save where the blood be proven elder than the registry itself, in which case the registry is deemed in error and the house confirmed by right of the keepers of record. She lowered the book into a silence that had gone absolute. The men who wrote this law 200 years ago were not fools, and they were not, whatever else they were, dishonest about blood. They were purists. They cared about ancient blood more than anything on earth, and they knew, because they were purists and it kept them up at night, that the registry was young, barely 3 centuries old, and that there were bloodlines older than any registry that could catch them, sleeping in the world that might one day surface. And they wrote clause 2 precisely for that case. They wrote it to protect ancient blood from a young registry's mistakes, because to a purist the unforgivable thing was not a muggle-born inheriting. The unforgivable thing was an ancient line being denied by a filing clerk. She turned to face the tiers, all of them, the whole plum-robed well of them. The Peverell line is 800 years old, the registry is 300. My blood is elder than the registry that failed to record it, and that is not my claim. It is a proven fact, sealed at Gringotts by the keepers of record in a rite this court has recognized for 1,000 years. Which means the Selwyn provision, the challenger's own weapon, the law they filed to destroy me, does not void my claim. It confirms it, in writing, in their own hand, 200 years ago. They brought a law to this court to prove I don't belong, and the law says, in the second half of the sentence they were too clever to read aloud, that I belong more than anyone in this room. She sat down. The challenge fails on its own instrument. I'm content to rest there. The well of stone erupted. The Malfoy advocate was on his feet, and the chief warlock was calling for order, and half the tiers were talking at once, and Harry watched the room turn the way a tide turns, all at once and without apology, the old families who had leaned toward the comfort of the law now leaning away from the men who had misquoted it to them, because there was nothing an ancient house hated more than being made to look like a fool by a clever opponent. unless it was being made to look like a fool by a muggle-born girl in front of its peers. The Elderblood Clause, the advocate tried, has not been invoked in. The Elderblood Clause has not needed to be invoked, Hermione said without rising, because until me there has never been an heir whose blood was proven elder than the registry. That's not disuse, sir. That's a law waiting 200 years for the exact case it was written for and finally getting it. You don't get to file a statute against me and then object when I read you the part that saves me. It's one sentence. You read half, I read the rest. That's not a technicality. That's the law. The advocate had no answer because there was none, and he sat, and the chief warlock, an old witch with a face like a closed ledger, looked down into the well for a long moment and then did the thing that Harry would remember as the true victory, larger than the argument, because it came from a woman who had no reason to love either of them and every reason to protect the old order. The challenge, she said, is dismissed. The instrument on which it was filed, the Selwyn provision, having been read in full and in force, confirms rather than voids the claim of the House of Peverell as sealed by the keepers of record at Gringotts. Let the record show that the seat is confirmed, the joining right is confirmed, and no further challenge may be filed upon the same instrument, the instrument being now exhausted. She set down her gavel stone. The court thanks the young Lady Black for her reading of Clause 2, which this court, to its embarrassment, had forgotten it wrote. We will not forget it again. It was as close to an apology as the Wisengamot had issued in a century, and the tears knew it, and the murmur that ran through them had changed its temperature entirely. Lucius Malfoy rose. He did it slowly, with the unhurried grace of a man who had lost a hand of cards, and intended everyone to see that he considered it only a hand. He did not look at Hermione now. He looked at Harry across the well and inclined his head a precise degree, and there was nothing warm in it and nothing careless either, only the cold acknowledgement of one player to another who has taken a trick he did not expect to lose. He gathered his robes, and his silver head caught the bad light, and he said to no one and to the whole court, in a voice pitched to Carrie, how fortunate for the girl that she reads so well. Let us hope for all our sakes that she reads the rest of the board as carefully as she reads the law. And he swept out, and his 4 allied houses swept out behind him, and Harry watched him go and felt the words land exactly where they had been aimed, because Lucius Malfoy did not make idle remarks, and a man who told you to watch the rest of the board was a man who already knew where the other pieces were moving. Harry was still turning the words over, cold in the pit of him, when the knowing arrived, not by messenger, not by any door, but through the gift, whole and terrible, and he understood, all at once and far too late, what the rest of the board had been. They did not let Harry and Hermione savor it, because the envoy's master had not sent the challenge to be savored, and the strike, the real strike, was already 3 counties away, and had been since the court convened. Harry knew it before the messenger reached the chamber. He knew it the way the keeping let him know things now, a cold certainty arriving whole in his mind, except this was not the threshold and not the wards. This was the gift, the other gift, the one Ignatus had named in the dark. You will always find each other now. It did not work only between the two of them, he understood in the space of one breath, rising from his chair before he had decided to. It ran along the whole braided line, thinned but real, to every drop of the 2 houses' blood in the world, and there were only a few of those drops left, and 2 of them were named Granger, and they were, at this moment, screaming. It's my parents, Hermione said. She was already on her feet. She had felt it too, the same instant, through the same gift, her face gone white in the bad light of the well. The Tonks house, Harry, the safe house, it's the safe house. The challenge was never meant to win. It was meant to put us here, in a court we couldn't leave, 3 counties from. We can leave, Harry said. We're leaving now. Kingsley Shacklebolt was already at the chamber door, because Kingsley had been standing guard through the whole hearing, and had felt the wards on his own protective charms go taut. And Sirius was coming down through the tiers 3 at a time with his wand out and Andromeda astride behind him. And the chief warlock was shouting for order that no longer existed, and none of it mattered, because the only thing in the world that mattered was 3 counties away behind stone that was being taken apart. They went by the fireplaces in the atrium, all of them, one after another, into green fire, and came out running. The Tonks house was on fire at one corner, and the fire was the least of it. Harry came out of the hearth into a garden full of curse-light, and his body knew what to do before his mind caught up. 5 years of exactly this teaching his wand to move on its own. There were figures in dark robes at the broken garden wall, 6, 7 hired wands by the sloppy violence of their casting, and they had come expecting to breach a Muggle family's flimsy protections, and had instead run into Andromeda Tonks's wardwork and someone else's fierce refusal to fall. And the garden was a chaos of light and smoke and shouting. And in the middle of it, backed against the house with her wand up and her daughter's borrowed defiance in every line of her, was a woman Harry had never met who had his best friend's exact stubborn jaw, Hermione's mother. Behind you, Hermione screamed, and her mother dropped, and the curse that would have taken her head passed through the space where it had been and blew a crater in the garden wall. And then Hermione was moving, and Harry had never seen her like this. had never seen anyone like this, because the keeping was in her, and the house magic was in her, and 5 years of being the cleverest witch of her age were in her. And she crossed that garden throwing shields ahead of her mother and curses behind her, and she did not miss. Harry took the left flank. He did not think about it. The Lord's ring was warm on his hand, and the threshold was steady in his chest, and the old confident thing that lived under his fear woke all the way up, and he moved into the curse light like a man walking into rain, and the hired wands who had come for 2 frightened dentists found themselves facing the keeper of the oldest door in Britain, and it did not go well for them. He did not use anything dark. He did not need to. He had learned from a friend who read too much that the best duelist is not the one with the cruelest curse, but the one who sees the whole board, and he saw the whole board now, the keeping showing it to him, every attacker and every angle in the exact place to stand so that their crossfire fouled itself, and he stood there, and it did. And the gift showed him something else, something he had not known it could do until the garden taught him. He could feel Hermione. Not guess where she was in the smoke, feel it, her position and her intent, the way you feel your own other hand in the dark, and he understood in the middle of the chaos that she could feel him too, and that the 2 of them had stopped fighting as 2 people and started fighting as one thing with 2 wands, so that when she raised a shield he was already casting through the gap it left, and when he broke a man's stance she was already there to finish it, without a word, without a glance. Because they did not need eyes for each other anymore. A hired wand tried to take her flank and found Harry's stunner waiting for him before he had finished the turn, thrown by a boy who had not looked and had not needed to. A curse arced toward Harry's back and met a shield Hermione had raised over her shoulder without breaking stride, because she had felt it coming through him before it left the wand. They moved through the burning garden like 2 halves of a single practiced thing, and the men who had been paid to break a family's flimsy wards had not been paid enough for this, and it showed in how fast they started looking for the exits. It was over in 90 seconds. It felt like an hour, and it felt like nothing. The hired wands broke and ran when 3 of them were down and stunned, and the 4th found Sirius Black's wand at his throat, and the garden went suddenly, ringingly quiet, full of smoke and the smell of scorched grass and the low crackle of the fire at the house's corner that Kingsley was already dousing with long sweeps of his wand. And then Harry saw the cost, because there was always a cost, and this one was lying in the grass by the garden gate, Ted Tonks, Andromeda's husband. Hermione's parents' host and guard, a muggle-born himself, a big gentle man who had married a black and been struck off the same tapestry as Iris, and who had stood in the gap at his own front door when the wands came and bought the seconds that let Andromeda's wards catch up. He was down and he was breathing, but there was blood, too much of it, and Andromeda was already on her knees in the grass with her hands pressed to his side, and her surgeon's comm cracked all the way through for the first time in Harry's knowing of her, saying his name, saying Ted, Ted, over and over, in a voice that had forgotten it belonged to the most composed woman in England. Ted lived. That was the thing Harry made himself hold on to through the long red hours that followed, the thing he repeated to Hermione in the corridor of St. Mungo's while the healers worked, and Andromeda would not leave the door, and Sirius stood guard over all of them with his face like a fist. Ted lived. The curse had been meant to kill and had been rushed, thrown by a hired hand already losing his nerve, and it had torn Ted Tonks badly and it had not killed him. And the healers, after the longest 4 hours of Harry's life, came out and said he would keep, that he would mend slow, but he would mend. And Andromeda had put her back against the wall and slid all the way down it to the floor and sat there, and no one had said anything. Because there was nothing to say that would not have been an insult to the size of it. The family came, because that was what the family did. Molly Weasley arrived within the hour with a basket she would never open and both arms free for holding, and she went straight to Andromeda on the floor and sat down beside her on the cold hospital tile without a word and stayed there. 2 women who barely knew each other, keeping a vigil together because one of them was in pain and the other could not bear to watch pain alone. Arthur came, and Bill and Remus, who had reached the garden too late to fight and had spent the hours since in a storm of self-blame that Sirius kept quietly talking him down from. Kingsley came when the last of the hired wands was in a ministry cell and stood guard at the corridor's end with Tonks, who was Andromeda's daughter and had her father's blood on her from carrying him in, and who would not sit and would not weep and would not leave the door. Even Luna arrived near dawn, having heard somehow the way Luna heard things, and she sat down next to Hermione's mother in the family room and told her in her dreaming way that Ted Tonks had a very stubborn kind of soul and that stubborn souls were the hardest for anything to take, and Mrs. Granger, who did not understand a word of the world her daughter lived in, took the strange pale girl's hand and held it and was, somehow, comforted. Harry moved among them through the long night and did the thing he was best at, which was not fighting, whatever the garden had shown, but this, being present, being steady, being the still point a frightened family could orient on. He brought tea no one drank. He sat with Andromeda for an hour and said nothing, and let his shoulder be there for her to lean on when the composure finally failed. He found Remus in a stairwell and told him the garden had needed the man who arrived in time to carry Ted to the healers more than it had needed one more wand, which was true, and which was the first thing all night that made Remus's shoulders come down from around his ears. This was the family the seller had bound him to protect, and it was here, all of it, gathered in a hospital corridor at 4 in the morning around a wounded man, and Harry understood, moving among them with his undrunk tea, that this was exactly the thing the envoy had promised to use against him, and that it was also precisely and unbearably the thing worth using anything to protect. Hermione's parents were unhurt. That was the other thing to hold on to. They sat together in the family room down the corridor, two dentists from a quiet suburb who had spent 5 years slowly understanding that their daughter had walked into a war, and who now understood it completely, and who had held Hermione so hard when she came through the doors that Harry had turned away to give them the moment. They were unhurt and they were safe, and it had cost a gentle man most of his blood to keep them so. He found Hermione much later on the roof. St. Mungo's had a roof the healers used, a flat gravelled space with a low wall and a view over the sleeping city, and she was sitting on the wall with her knees drawn up and her back to the door, and she did not turn when he came out because she knew it was him, because she would always know it was him now. The gift saw to that. He nearly died because of me, she said to the city. Ted, a man I've met 4 times. He nearly bled to death in his own garden because my parents were in his house, and my parents were in his house because they're my parents, and the envoy told us. He told us. Grief brought to the ones who hold the key. He said it in the marble hall, and I wrote it on the map in green ink, and I still pointed us at the family and let them put us in a court 3 counties away. Her voice did not break. It was worse than breaking. It was perfectly level. I read the whole map, Harry. I was so proud of reading the whole map, and I still lost the round, and a good man is in there full of another family's blood because I was busy being clever in a stone well. Harry came and sat on the wall beside her, close, their shoulders touching, and he did not tell her she was wrong because she was not entirely wrong, and she would have known if he tried. You didn't lose the round, he said. You won the round. That's the thing you're not letting yourself see because Ted's blood is louder than the wind right now. Listen to me. He waited until she turned her head. The challenge was designed to do 2 things, void your claim and pin us in that court while they went for the family, and you beat both. You beat the first so completely that Lucius Malfoy's own weapon confirmed your inheritance in front of the entire Wisengamot, which means they can never use the law against you again. The law is yours now, forever. And the second, the strike on the family. The only reason it failed, the only reason your parents are alive and Ted is going to live, is the week we spent building walls. The week you spent, every green mark on that map. If we hadn't fortified the Tonks house to Andromeda's specifications, those wands wouldn't have run into Wardwork and a fighting Ted. They'd have walked through a garden gate into 2 sleeping dentists, and there wouldn't have been a battle. There'd have been a house, and then no house. He took her hand, the one with the lady's ring. You didn't point us the wrong direction. You pointed us at both directions, and you were right about both, and the walls you built are the reason the cost tonight was a wound and not a grave. Ted's alive because you read the map. Don't let the envoy take the win from you. That's the whole of his method, make the victory feel like a defeat so you'll stop fighting. Don't let him. She was quiet for a long time, looking at the city, and then she leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, and let go of the level voice, and he put his arm around her and held on while she came apart quietly against him under the indifferent stars, and he did not try to fix it, because some things you did not fix, you only witnessed so that the person did not have to carry them alone. He's going to come himself now, she said at last, when the worst of it had passed and her voice had steadied into exhaustion. You know that the bureaucrat failed, and the legal challenge failed, and the hired wands failed, and every layer of intermediary between us and the thing he wants has burned away tonight. There's nothing left to send. The next thing that comes for the keeping won't be an envoy or an advocate or a purchased curse. It'll be him, whatever he is now. I know. I'm not ready. Neither am I, he tightened his arm around her. But we don't have to be ready separately. That was always his mistake, thinking about us like 2 locks he could pick one at a time. We're not 2 of anything. Whatever he is when he comes at both of us together, or he doesn't come at all, and there has never once in 800 years been 2 of us, and he doesn't know what that's worth, because his whole line has always been one man alone, wanting. Harry looked out over the sleeping city that did not know how close it had come, and did not know it had keepers, and would go on not knowing if he had anything to say about it. Let him come. We'll be standing in the same place, holding the same door. That's the one arrangement he's never had to beat. She did not answer for a while. Below them, a night bus rattled past 3 streets over and was gone, and the ordinary sound of it, the most ordinary sound in the world, seemed to reach them from very far away, from a city that would never know what it had nearly lost or who had stood between it and the losing. Harry felt the weight of that distance settle over both of them, the strange loneliness of guarding something no one could be told about, and he understood that this, too, was part of the keeping, this quiet apartness, and that the only thing that made it bearable was that there were 2 of them inside it, and that neither of them would ever have to be the only one who knew. He tightened his arm around her and she let herself be held, and for a while they simply breathed together in the cold. Two exhausted people who had won a round they were not allowed to celebrate, keeping each other warm on a hospital roof above a sleeping city. And it was, of everything that had happened that endless day, the part Harry would remember longest, because it was the part that was only theirs. "Thank you," Hermione said at last very quietly, "for coming up here, for not fixing it. For knowing the difference." She turned her head against his shoulder. "You always know the difference. I don't know how you learned it, growing up the way you did, but you did, and it's the thing I'd keep if I could only keep one thing about you." A pause. "Don't tell the others I said that. I have a reputation for being the one who keeps everyone alive, and I intend to protect it." "Your secret's safe," Harry said. "I'm very good at keeping things now. It's practically my job." They sat on the roof until the sky began to gray, and down below in the mending city Ted Tonks slept and breathed and would wake, and Andromeda kept her vigil at his door, and Hermione's parents held each other in a bright hospital room, and the whole imperfectly guarded family the two of them had bound themselves to protect slept on under the walls that had this once been enough. And the two keepers of the threshold watched the dawn come up over all of it and did not let go of each other's hands. Because the next dawn they both knew was going to ask them for everything. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The elder claim Albus Dumbledore came to Grimmauld Place on the last day of August, and he came, for once in his long life, as a man who had questions rather than answers. Harry had not sent for him. Hermione had not sent for him. He arrived at the newly warded door, and the wards, which turned ministry owls and hooded craftsmen with equal firmness, parted for him without being asked, which Harry noticed and filed nowhere, because there was no drawer in his understanding it fit. Dumbledore stepped into the hall of the house that no longer screamed at Muggle-borns, and he stopped under the silent portrait of old Mrs. Black, and he looked around the light-filled hall with an expression Harry had never seen him wear, and it took Harry a moment to place it because he had never once imagined it on that particular face. It was awe, careful, old, unwilling awe. "I felt it," Dumbledore said without greeting, which was itself unlike him. 6 weeks ago. I was in my office at Hogwarts, and I was arguing with a portrait about something I no longer remember, and the whole castle turned over in its foundations, every stone of it, and every instrument on every shelf in my office rang at once like struck glass, and then went still. I have spent 1,000 years' worth of scholarship, across a life that has been longer than was ever good for me, learning to know what magic sounds like. I did not know what that sounded like. I have come at my age humbled to ask 2 children if they know, because the castle pointed here, and the castle is rarely wrong. "Sit down, Professor," Hermione said. She had come into the hall with a book still open in her hand, and she looked at the old man with the wary respect of a student who had begun, this strange summer, to outgrow her teachers. "You're going to want to be sitting down. And it's going to take a while, and some of it you already know, and the parts you know are the parts you're going to like least, because they're the parts where you were wrong," they told him. In the drawing room, with the message stone glowing in its jar and the tea going cold, they told him all of it, and Albus Dumbledore, who had spent his whole life being the person in the room who understood the most, sat and listened to 2 17-year-olds explain the oldest magic in Britain, and did not interrupt, and grew, as they spoke, very quiet and very old, and at the end of it he took off his spectacles and pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose and was silent a long while. "The keeping of the threshold," he said at last. "You are the keepers of the threshold." He put his spectacles back on. "I have spent this last decade chasing a single terrible truth about the man who calls himself Lord Voldemort, and I believed I was the only living soul who understood it, and I was proud of the understanding in the way a man is proud of a burden no one else can carry, and I see now that I understood only half of it, and understood that half backwards." He looked at them both. "Do you know what he has done to himself, Tom Riddle? Do you know what the pieces are that he has scattered and hidden?" "We know what they are for," Harry said. "Ignatus told us in the vault. There's a thing in the world that spent its whole existence trying to do what the 2 dead brothers did, to rule the threshold and to reopen it, to command death and to escape it, and it's torn itself into pieces to do it." The words came steady, though the meaning under them did not. "He didn't tell us what the pieces were called, he told us what they were. Wounds, a door propped open and nailed shut at the same time. He said the man who made them had made himself into the exact wound the keeping exists to heal." Dumbledore closed his eyes. "Horcruxes," he said. "The pieces are called Horcruxes, and I have spent 10 years learning that they exist and where a few of them might lie, and I have thought of them the entire time as anchors, tethers to life. A wizard's soul torn and hidden so that his body cannot truly die while the pieces endure. I have been hunting them as a huntsman hunts, to destroy them one by one and so make the man mortal again, and I believed this was the whole of the problem, and I believed I was the only one equipped to solve it." He opened his eyes, and there was something in them worn nearly through. "But you have just told me the thing I was too proud to see. They are not merely anchors, they are wounds in the threshold itself." Every one he made tore the door a little further off its hinges. He has not been cheating death. He has been vandalizing the one structure that holds the lit world and the dark one apart for 50 years, and he does not know it, because he has never once in his life understood a door he could not command. The reason the castle rang 6 weeks ago, the reason every instrument I own struck like glass, is that after 800 years of no one keeping the door has keepers again, and the wound felt it. Wherever the pieces of him lie, they felt the keeping wake, and they know now that the thing they have been tearing at has, at last, been given hands to hold it shut. The drawing room was very quiet. That's why he's coming, Hermione said softly. It's not just that we hold the inheritance he wants. It's that we're the only thing in the world that can undo what he's done. Keepers of a door can heal a wound in it. He spent 50 years making himself into the wound, and we're the mending, and some part of him, some torn instinct in every scattered piece knows it. Yes, Dumbledore said, and it changes everything I thought I knew about how this ends. I believe the Horcruxes must be found and destroyed one at a time, a labor of years, in secret, while he grew stronger. I believe the child prophesied against him would have to strike the final blow with his own hand and might not survive it. He looked at Harry, and there was an apology in it decades deep. I have been carrying that prophecy like a sentence I meant to spare you from as long as I could and then spend you on. I see now I was wrong about the shape of the whole thing. It was never going to be a huntsman's war, tracking anchors through the dark. It is a keeper's war. The door does not need the pieces of him found and burned. The door needs to be held shut against him by the ones who keep it, so completely and so together that when he comes to force it open, the wound finds it cannot tear what is finally being kept and heals against him, and closes with him on the wrong side of it. He rose, and for once in Harry's knowing of him he looked, not diminished, but relieved of something, an old man setting down a weight he had carried alone too long. I came here to give you answers. Instead you have given me one, and it is the only one that ever mattered, and I am ashamed it took 2 children to find it, and glad past saying that they did. Whatever you need of me, and whatever comes, you have only to ask. I will follow you into this. It has been a very long time since I followed anyone, and I find to my surprise that I am ready to. They spent September learning to hold the door together, and it was the strangest and most beautiful schooling of Harry's life. Gornuk taught them when the goblins could be persuaded in the deep quiet places under the bank, and Dumbledore taught them what a wizard could teach, and Ignatus's vault, when they returned to it, taught them the rest, because the keeping deepened the more they used it, unfolding itself the way a language does once you stop translating and start dreaming in it. They learned that the gift of finding each other could be widened and thinned, that with effort they could feel the threshold everywhere it ran, could sense the places in the world where the door was thin and the places where it had been torn, and that when they reached for it together, hand in hand, the whole vast quiet architecture of it opened to them like a cathedral opening its doors, and they could, for a moment, stand at the center of the oldest structure in existence and simply keep it. And the keeping did not frighten them anymore, it steadied them. It was the most steadying thing either of them had ever known. Gornuk taught them the goblin half of it, which no wizard had ever been taught, and he did it grudgingly, and then, as the weeks went on, with something that in a goblin passed for joy. Your kind think of the door as a thing you use, he told them, deep underground in a chamber his people had cut before the Romans came. Wands and rites and prizes. You are always reaching for the handle. My people never made that mistake, because my people do not make things to use them. We make things to keep them, which is why we have kept your gold for 1,000 years and never once spent it, and why we despise you a little for how freely you spend what you did not make. The keeping is not a handle. It is the oldest kind of goblin work there is, though no goblin made it. It is a debt that is never called in and never paid off, and is holy precisely because of that. You hold the door not to be repaid. You hold it because it must be held, and because you are the one standing there, and because a thing entrusted is a thing you do not put down, not for gold, not for grief, not for your own life. That is the whole of the law we live by, and it is the whole of the keeping, and it is the first time in all my years I have met 2 humans who understood it without being made to. It is a great pity you were not born goblins. I mean that as the highest praise my people have, and I will, of course, deny it. There was a night in the vault Harry would carry for the rest of his life. Gornuk had gone, and Dumbledore had gone, and it was only the 2 of them in the pale glowing chamber that no cathedral had ever been lit like, and Hermione had said, in the careful voice she used for a thing she had thought about a long time before daring it, I want to try holding it all the way open. Not touching the threshold, standing in it, both of us, to see what we're actually keeping. And Harry had taken her hand because that was the only way in, and they had reached for the door together, all the way, further than they had ever gone. The chamber fell away. That was the only word for it, though nothing moved. The pale stone and the great triangular sign and the low dark plinth all remained exactly where they were, and at the same time they were suddenly very far off, because Harry and Hermione were standing, the 2 of them, at the threshold itself, at the seam of the whole lit world, and it went out from them in every direction at once, a structure so vast and so quiet that his mind refused it at first and then, held steady by the slow, certain heartbeat beside his own, slowly stopped refusing and simply looked. It was not dark and it was not light. It was the place where the 2 met, an endless patient membrane strung through everything that lived, holding the room of the world apart from the room beyond it, and it was beautiful past any language he had, and it was tired, he understood. Tired the way anything is tired that has gone 800 years without hands to mend it, worn thin in 1,000 places where careless magic had pressed against it, and torn in a scattered handful where something had savaged it on purpose, over and over. For 50 years, and where the two of them stood holding it together, the thinness firmed and the worn places knit, not because they willed it, but because they were simply there, present, paying attention, keeping. That was the whole of the keeping, not power, attention. The oldest and rarest gift there is, which is to stand at the most important place in existence and simply, faithfully refuse to look away. They came back to themselves a long while later, sitting on the vault floor with their hands locked white-knuckled together and tears on both their faces they did not bother to hide, because you did not see a thing like that and stay dry-eyed, and Hermione had said in a wrecked whisper, "It's so tired, Harry. It's been holding the whole world apart alone for 800 years, and it's so tired," and Harry had held her, and had understood that whatever it cost, whatever came, they were never going to be able to set this down again because they had seen it now, and you could not unsee the thing you were made to keep, and it could only be done together. That was the thing the month taught them past any forgetting. Alone, each of them could feel the threshold faintly, could touch it, could not hold it. It took two. It had always taken two. The keeping was designed from the beginning for a pair who would carry it between them, and every time they reached for it, they reached for each other first, and every time they held the door, they held each other's hands to do it, and by the end of the month, the difference between the two acts had worn away entirely, so that Harry could no longer say where holding the door stopped and holding Hermione began, and did not want to and stopped trying. It was on the last warm night of the month, on the roof of Grimmauld Place under a sky going toward autumn, that the thing between them that had been true for years and unspoken for almost as long finally found its words. They had gone up to rest after an evening in the vault the way they did now, because the roof was quiet and the city was far below, and neither of them slept well any more. Hermione sat with her back against the chimney and Harry sat beside her, and the keeping was still faintly awake in both of them, the second heartbeat close, and for a long while neither of them said anything because they did not need to, because the whole month had been teaching them how much could pass between them without words. "I've been thinking about Ignatus's gift," Hermione said eventually. "The finding. He said one of us will never be lost while the other lives and looks." She turned her head against the chimney to look at him. "I used to think it was a piece of magic, a useful one, a tactical advantage. I catalogued it that way in the beginning next to the house sense and the ward feeling, a capability." Her voice went quieter. "It isn't a capability, Harry. I've stopped being able to pretend it is. It's the truest thing about me now. Somewhere under everything I am, there's a compass, and it points at you, and it has for longer than the magic. The magic just made me admit it." Harry looked at her in the failing light and did not reach for anything clever, because this was the one conversation he had been having with himself for 5 years and had never once found the courage to have out loud. "I walked into a bathroom to save you from a troll when I was 11, he said. "I told you once that I didn't do it because it was brave. I did it because a world without you wasn't one I'd stand in. I've never stopped feeling that. Every single year through everything." He reached over and took her hand, the one with the lady's ring, as he had 100 times to hold a door, except this time there was no door. "The rite sealed us to hold 2 houses. Ignatus's gift ties us so I'll always find you. But none of that made me love you, Hermione. It just built a lot of very old, very grand machinery around a thing that was already there. I loved you before there was a single ring or a single ledger. I'd love you if we handed both houses back tomorrow and went to be ordinary people who mend their own glasses badly." His voice was not quite steady, and he let it not be. "I'm not saying it because of the magic. I'm saying it in spite of all the magic, so you'll know it's mine and not the rite's. I love you. I have for years. That's the true thing under the compass." She was very still, and her eyes were bright in the last of the light, and then she leaned in and kissed him once, softly, her hand rising to the side of his face, and the second heartbeat under his own quickened and steadied, and the whole vast quiet keeping of the world seemed to hold still around the two of them on the roof, honored, unhurried, at rest. When she drew back, she kept her forehead against his, and she was almost laughing, and it was the freest sound he had heard her make all year. "I love you too," she said. "For the record, in spite of all the magic, I want it written down somewhere the rite can't take credit for it." She kissed him again, quickly, and then settled against his shoulder and looked out at the city with him, and their joined hands lay easy between them, no door to keep, only each other. "It doesn't change the war," she said after a while, practical to the bone even now. "No," Harry agreed, his cheek against her hair, "but it changes who's fighting it. Not 2 keepers who happen to be partners, 2 people who chose each other, holding the oldest door in Britain because they'd rather keep it together than be safe apart." He felt her smile against his shoulder. "He's never going to understand that. It's the one thing his whole torn existence has never once had. Let him come at it. We'll be right here." That night Harry woke with the old scar burning as it had not in years, and lay in the dark of his room in the house that no longer sulked, and felt the enemy reaching. It was not a vision, not the shared dreams of the bad years. It was something worse and quieter, a pressure at the edge of him, patient and cold and enormous, testing the same boundary the craftsman had tested at the wall, except this boundary was Harry himself. He felt Voldemort's attention move over him the way the hooded figures had moved over the wards, appraising, unhurried, and he felt under the appraisal a hunger so old and so total that it had stopped being anything as warm as rage and become simply a fact, a gravity, the pull of a thing that had wanted one thing for 50 years and could no longer remember wanting anything else. The threshold, he understood, lying still in the dark. He wants the threshold, not to keep it, to end it. To be the one thing on either side of the last door, alone, forever, with nothing left that he does not command. And Harry did the only thing the keeping had taught him to do, which was not to fight the pressure and not to flee it, but simply to hold, to be present, to keep his own door as he had learned to keep the world's. And after a long, cold moment the attention withdrew, unsatisfied, patient, promising to return, and the scar cooled, and down the hall he felt, faint and steady, the second heartbeat that was Hermione asleep and safe, and he held on to that until the dark went ordinary again. He did not tell her until morning, and when he did she did not waste a moment on comfort, because she knew him too well to insult him with it. She simply said, then he stopped waiting. He's reaching for the thing directly now, testing whether he can take it without us, and he's learned that he can't, which means the next move is the one that makes us bring it to him. And she had been right, as she was about the terrible things and the wonderful ones alike. He came at it 3 days later, and he came, as the envoy had promised in the marble hall, not by force upon the lock, but by grief brought to the ones who held the key. The leak, when they finally found it, was slight and old and human, which was the worst kind. It was a goblin named Griffook who had handled a black vault years before and owed a wizard a debt of the sort that gold does not settle, and who had sold, for the wiping of that debt, one thread of information, not the record which was sealed but the schedule, where the keepers went and when, where the family sheltered, and how the guard rotated. Gornuk brought them the truth of it himself, and he brought it on his knees because a rite keeper whose bank had been betrayed from within carried the shame of it as his own, and he laid the whole ugly business before them and said, "We will deal with the traitor by our own law, which is older and harder than yours, and you do not want to see it. But the harm is done. He has known your movements for a fortnight. And 3 hours ago your movements took your godfather to the West Country, to close the last of the Peverell business at the place the daughter was hidden, alone but for one guard on a schedule a traitor sold. The hour that followed was the worst Harry had spent since the garden. They tried to reach Sirius, of course. They tried everything. Remus went to the West Country by Portkey and found the cottage where the Peverell daughter had been hidden 2 centuries gone standing open and empty. The guard stunned in the doorway and no mark of a struggle anywhere, because there had been no struggle, because Sirius Black had walked out to meet whatever came with his wand in his hand and been taken by something that did not bother to fight what it could simply carry off. Kingsley worked every channel the ministry had and found nothing, because the men who had done this did not use the ministry's channels. Andromeda stood in the middle of the drawing room with her mother's ring on her hand and her face gone to stone, and said once quietly, "They have taken the last of my brothers," and no one corrected the arithmetic, because to her it was true, and because in the way that mattered it was true for Harry too. And through all of it Harry stood very still at the center of the storm, and did not shout and did not break, because he had learned in a garden full of curse light that the person the family orients on cannot afford to be the person who comes apart, and because under his stillness the keeping held steady and told him, faint and certain, that Sirius was not dead. He would have felt it. The gift ran to every drop of the 2 houses' blood in the world, and Sirius was black to the marrow, and the compass of the keeping still found him, alive, frightened, far to the west, exactly where the enemy meant them to look. That was the one mercy in the whole ugly business, and it was not an accident, and Harry knew it was not an accident, because a hostage you cannot prove is alive is a hostage that fails, and the envoy did not deal in things that failed. The message came an hour later, and it came the way the worst things always came, quietly, by an ordinary owl, in an ordinary envelope, addressed in a hand Harry did not know and would never forget. It was not a ransom. Ransoms are for men who want something they can be paid. It was an invitation, courteous and calm and written in the envoy's own careful hand, and it said that Sirius Orion Black was alive and unharmed and would remain so, that no demand was attached and none would be, that the keepers of the threshold were simply and warmly invited to come to Godric's Hollow, to the old churchyard where their many times grandfather Ignatus Peverell was buried under the mark of the 3 brothers at midnight together, and to bring nothing but themselves. It said that Lord Voldemort had waited 50 years to stand before a door he could not command, and that he wished to discuss its opening with the only 2 people who could accomplish it, over the matter of a godfather's continued good health, as reasonable people in the place where the whole long story had first begun. It said at the bottom in a different hand, cramped and cold and old past reckoning, "I have taken such care of your family all this while. Come and see how careful I can be. Come together, he will not part you, he would not dream of it, the door needs you both." Harry read it twice and set it down, and found that the room had gone very still around him, and that Hermione's hand had found his without either of them deciding it. and that under the terrible calm he had learned this year to keep, the old confident thing that lived beneath everything had woken all the way up, and did not flinch, and was, if anything, almost eager, because a war fought in courtrooms and gardens and legal clauses was a war you could lose 100 quiet ways, and this was at last. The whole thing in one place at 1 hour, brought down to the one arrangement his enemy had never once beaten. "It's a trap," Sirius would have said if Sirius had been there, and Harry heard it in his head in exactly Sirius's voice, and answered it as he would have answered the man. "Of course it's a trap," he said aloud to Hermione, to Dumbledore, to the found family gathering white-faced in the doorway. "He's taken Sirius to a churchyard to force us to a door he can't open, so he can stand over the people I love and make me open it to save them. It's a trap. It's the exact trap the envoy described in the marble hall, the one Hermione wrote on the map in green ink, the one we've known was coming since August. There was never going to be a version where it wasn't a trap." He looked at Hermione, and she looked back, and the compass in both of them pointed the same way, the way it always had, the way it always would. But he's made the same mistake his whole line makes, the mistake on the bridge, the mistake in the marble hall, the mistake he can't stop making because he's only ever been one man alone and can't imagine being two. He picked the message back up and held it in the lamplight, the courteous invitation to the oldest confrontation in the world. He thinks he's holding a hostage to force a key. He isn't. He's arranged, with enormous care, to stand a torn and unnatural thing directly in front of the two people whose entire purpose is to heal exactly that wound at the grave of the man who taught us how, on the one night we're strongest, and he's told us the time and the place and asked us, please, to come together. He thinks he's baiting a trap. Harry set the letter down. "He's booking his own funeral, and he's addressed the invitations himself, and he's put them in our hands." "Harry," Dumbledore said quietly, "he will have prepared. He is cruel, and he is clever, and he will have made the churchyard a fortress, and he holds a man you love. Do not let the poetry of it make you careless. He has lost every exchange this summer, and he knows it, and a cornered thing that cannot win by cunning will try to win by cost. Will hurt Sirius the moment he believes it serves him. He may hurt Sirius simply to watch what it does to you. You must go in knowing that the hostage is real, and the danger is real, and the grief he has promised is a thing he is entirely willing to deliver." "I know," Harry said, and the knowing sat cold and clear in him next to the confidence, not canceling it. "That's why we don't go in as huntsmen, trying to save one man by finding the right curse. We go in as keepers. We don't open it, whatever he does, whatever it costs, because the moment we open it, he's won and Sirius dies anyway, and so does the world. And we trust the one thing his whole existence has never let him trust." He looked around the room, at the found family, at Dumbledore, at the woman beside him whose heartbeat he would find across any dark, that we're better at not letting go of each other than he is at making us. They did not go alone, whatever the letter asked. The letter asked them to come together and bring nothing but themselves, and they would come together because that was the whole of their strength, but the rest of the instruction they set aside, because they had learned this summer that a family is not a weakness to be walled off from a fight. It is the reason there is a fight, and it does not stay home while its children walk into a churchyard at midnight. Dumbledore would come and stand where the wards were thinnest. The Order would come, Kingsley and Tonks and Remus and a dozen more, to hold the perimeter and to take the churchyard back inch by inch if it came to that. Sirius's own name would be on the field in the person of Andromeda, who had left Ted mending under the Weasleys' guard and come, in her mother's dueling robes, with her face like a closed door, because a black had been taken and she was a black, and there was arithmetic in that older than any of them. They built the plan the way they built everything now, together, at the long table where the whole strange summer had been fought, and Dumbledore laid the shape of it out and then, remarkably, deferred to the two of them on the heart of it, because the heart of it was the keeping, and the keeping was theirs. The Order would take the churchyard from the outside in, Dumbledore said, and draw off whatever forces Voldemort had brought, and above all they would find Sirius and get him clear, because a hostage rescued is a hostage that cannot be spent. But no one, Hermione said, and she said it looking around the whole table until every one of them had heard it, no one was to strike at Voldemort himself. Not Dumbledore, not Kingsley, not Remus with the wolf close under his skin, no one. "Want to," she said. "When you see him, when you see what he's done to himself, every instinct you have will scream to end it, and if you try you'll die because you'll be fighting a wound as though it were a man, and it isn't, and it can't be beaten that way. The only thing in the world that can close what he's become is the keeping, and the keeping is us, and we do it by holding the door shut against him no matter what he does. Your job is to keep everything else off us long enough for us to do ours, that's all. That's everything, buy us the time and trust us with the door." They agreed because there was nothing else to do, and because they had all watched, this summer, what happened when they trusted the two of them with an impossible thing. Later, in the hour before they left, Harry found Hermione alone at the drawing-room window where she had stood the night the house first opened its doors for her, and he came and stood beside her, and for a while neither of them said anything, the way they had learned they could. Then she said, without turning, "If it goes wrong tonight, if he takes one of us and not the other." She stopped. The gift finds each other across any distance, through any dark, behind any door but the last one. Ignatius said that, any door but the last one. Her voice was steady, which was how he knew what it cost. I need you to promise me something, and I need you to mean it, because you're very bad at this particular promise and I've watched you break it before. If it comes to the last door tonight for me, you don't follow me through it to keep me company. You keep the world's door shut, even if it means letting go of mine. Promise me you'll keep the world before you keep me. No, Harry said. She turned then. Harry, I'll promise you I'll keep the world's door shut. I'll promise you I won't open it for him, whatever he does, whatever it costs, even if it's you. He took both her hands. But I won't promise to let go of yours, because that promise is a lie, and you'd know it was a lie the second I said it, and you deserve better from me than a comforting lie in the last hour. Here's the truth instead. I'm not going to have to choose, because we're not going to lose, because there has never once been two of us, and he doesn't know what that's worth. But if I'm wrong, if it all comes down to the last door in your hand, then I will keep the world shut against him with everything I have, and I will not let go of you either, and I will find out the hard way in that exact moment whether a keeper who refuses to choose can hold both. And I'd rather find that out than live having let go of you to be safe. His voice roughened. You told me on the roof you have a compass that points at me. Mine points at you. It's not going to learn a new direction tonight to make the war tidier. So no, I won't promise to let go. I'll promise to hold everything, all of it, you included. That's the only promise I've got that isn't a lie, and it's yours. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she pressed her forehead to his and closed her eyes and did not argue, because she had asked for a comforting lie and been given a terrifying truth instead, and she had known asking that the truth was the reason she loved him and that she would not have traded it for all the comfort in the world. All right, she whispered. Then hold everything, don't you dare drop any of it. I won't, he said. Come on, let's go bring Sirius home and shut a door. But the door itself, and the thing that waited to force it, and the grave where the whole long story began, that would be Harry and Hermione together, as it had always been meant to be, as the rite had sealed them and the keeping had shaped them and their own two hearts had chosen, long before any magic thought to make it law. They stood in the hall of the house that no longer screamed in the hour before midnight, dressed for the cold and armed with nothing but each other and the oldest trust in Britain, and Harry took both of Hermione's hands as he had in the cellar the night the floor read them and looked at her, and did not need to ask the question because the answer was already keeping the door between them, steady and slow and entirely unshaken. Together, she said. Together, he said, all the way down. Whatever's in that churchyard. The family saw them off in the hall, and no one made speeches, because the time for speeches had passed somewhere around the second impossible thing that summer. Molly held Hermione's face in both hands and looked at her and did not cry, and then held Harry the same way and said only, bring each other back. I don't care about the door or the houses or any of it. Bring each other back to this kitchen and I'll feed you both until you can't move. Andromeda, dressed for war in her mother's robes, put her hand on Harry's shoulder and said, get my cousin. Whatever else happens tonight, get Sirius, and I will owe you a debt no goblin could name. Dumbledore said nothing at all. He only inclined his head to the two of them deeply, the way Gornak had knelt outside the vault, the bow of a very old and very great man to something older and greater, and it was, of all the farewells, the one that told Harry most clearly how the world had turned. Ron caught Harry at the door last and did not embrace him this time, only looked at him for a moment with the particular steadiness he saved for the things that mattered too much to joke about. I'm not coming to the churchyard, he said. Kingsley told me, too young, not trained for whatever that is going to be. I'd only be another person you'd have to protect. I hate it. I want you to know I hate it, and I'm doing it anyway, because you two need to not be worrying about me tonight. Gripped Harry's arm. So here's the deal. You go and you keep your door and you don't do anything stupid and noble and alone, because you're not alone. You've never once been alone, and if you come back and tell me you tried to carry any of it by yourself, I'll never let you hear the end of it. Bring her home. Bring yourself home. Bring Sirius home. And then we're going to spend about a year doing absolutely nothing, and you're both going to let me win at chess to make up for a summer of feeling useless. He stepped back. That's it. That's the whole speech. Go and keep the world, you enormous show-offs. And Harry, who had spent 5 years learning what Ron's jokes were made of, heard what he had folded carefully underneath this one and gripped his friend's arm in return and did not embarrass either of them by naming it. And they went out into the dark to keep the door and to bring their godfather home and to close, at last, on the wrong side of the oldest threshold in the world, the wound that had spent 50 years learning every way to tear and had never once learned the only thing that could have saved it, which was how to be held. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. What the blood keeps. The churchyard at Godric's Hollow lay under a sky scoured clean of cloud, and the stars over it were very bright and very cold, and Harry understood, walking through the lich gate with Hermione's hand in his, that his enemy had chosen the place for its poetry, and had chosen wrong because the poetry belonged to them. He had never been here. He had been born a mile away and orphaned in a house he could not yet make himself visit, and he had never once stood among these leaning stones where the oldest of his blood lay sleeping. The graves went back and back, the newer ones legible and the older ones worn to soft gray suggestions, and near the heart of the yard, under a yew that had been old when the church was young, stood a stone so ancient its face was nearly smooth, and on it, still faintly readable after 800 winters, was cut a sign Harry could have found in the dark: a wand, a stone, a cloak thrown over both. Ignatius Peverell's grave, the place the whole long story began. And standing before it, waiting, patient as the yew, was the thing that had spent 50 years trying to end the story for good. Harry felt the grave before he saw who guarded it. The keeping ran to it the way water runs downhill, because this was the resting place of the first keeper, the man who had greeted the threshold as an equal and walked through it on his own 2 feet, and something of that old peace lingered in the ground here, worn smooth and deep by 8 centuries, so that even now, with an enemy standing over it and the frost stiff on the grass, the grave was the calmest place in the churchyard. Harry drew a breath of the cold, clean air and let the calm of it steady him, and beside him he felt Hermione do the same, the two of them pausing in the lich gate to take one shared moment from the first keeper's rest before they walked into what waited. Beyond the walls, the outer battle was catching light, cursefire blooming and guttering in the dark like a distant storm, and Harry could feel the order in it, Dumbledore's steady presence anchoring the whole ragged perimeter, Kingsley and Remus and the others drawing Voldemort's forces outward and away, buying with their bodies the empty churchyard the 2 keepers needed. It was working. The plan was holding. All they had to do was walk to the grave of the first keeper and refuse until the moment came to do the one thing the enemy had brought them here to do. "He's at Ignatius's stone," Hermione murmured, so low it was barely sound. "He put Sirius at Ignatius's stone. He thinks it's a taunt, standing over the grave of the brother who understood, holding a hostage, daring us." Her hand tightened on Harry's. "He has no idea he's standing exactly where the whole thing was decided the first time, on ground that has kept the peace for 800 years, at the feet of the one man in your whole line who already beat him. He picked this place to break us. He picked the one place in Britain where we're strongest. Come on, let's go teach him what a threshold is." Voldemort had not brought an army into the churchyard itself. That was the first thing Harry marked, and it told him a great deal. The army was out beyond the walls, a ring of dark figures. The order was even now sliding into the shadows to engage, and Harry could hear the first spellfire begin at the edges of his hearing, Dumbledore and Kingsley, and the rest drawing the outer battle away exactly as planned. But within the low churchyard wall there was only Voldemort, and the envoy standing a pace behind and to the side with his hood down at last, his forgettable face turned up to the cold stars, and kneeling in the frost-stiff grass before the ancient grave with his hands bound behind him and a gag of woven shadow across his mouth, alive, straining, unbroken, Sirius. Sirius saw them come through the gate and made a sound behind the gag that needed no translation. It said, "Go back." It said, "Run." It said, "I told you to come back up, not come here, you idiot children." And it said, under all of it, the thing Sirius would never have let himself say aloud, which was that he was glad, terribly and helplessly glad, to see them alive one more time. "They came," Voldemort said, and turned. Harry had seen him before in a graveyard not unlike this one, in the worst hour of his 4th year, and the thing that turned to face him now was and was not that same figure. The white face, the red eyes, the absence where a nose should be, those were the same. But he had learned to read the threshold this summer, and the keeping showed him now what his eyes alone could not, and what it showed him was almost unbearable. Voldemort was thin, not in body, in being. He stood in the frostlit churchyard, trailing a wrongness that Harry could feel through the keeping, the way you feel a draft from a door that will not close, and he understood, looking at his enemy with a keeper's sight, exactly what Ignatius and Dumbledore had told him, and had not been able to make him feel until now. This was not a man. This was a man who had been torn into pieces and stretched thin across them, a soul so subdivided that no single part of it was wholly here, a thing that had spent 50 years vandalizing the one structure that held the worlds apart and had, in the doing, become a walking hole in it. He was a wound that had learned to talk, and he was, under the red-eyed calm, in a pain so old and so constant that he had long ago stopped calling it pain and started calling it ambition. "Do you know," Voldemort said, and his high cold voice was almost gentle, almost kind, in the way the envoys had been in the marble hall, "how long I have looked for a door I could not open. Everything opens for me. That is what I am. I have opened death itself so many times that I have lost the count of my own returns. And then 6 weeks ago I felt a door in the world that would not open for me, that had never opened for anyone, that woke and found keepers, and I understood at last that there was one thing left in existence that I did not command, and I have wanted it, children, with an appetite I did not know I still possessed since the hour I felt it wake." He spread his long white hands. "I did not come to kill you. Killing you would waste the only key in the world. I came to reason with you. You are young and clever, and you love your godfather, and you have a great many soft, warm people behind those walls whom I could reach any night I chose. Open the door. Open it for me, both of you, willingly, the way it must be opened, and I will give you back your godfather whole, and I will leave your soft, warm people to their soft, warm lives, and I will trouble you no further, because I will have the one thing I have ever truly wanted, and a man who has what he wants is the most generous creature alive." "No," Harry said. He said it quietly, and he said it without heat, and he felt Hermione's hand steady in his, and he watched the word land in his enemy and find nothing to push against, because it was neither a challenge nor a flinch, only a keeper answering a question about a door. "You misunderstand the door," Harry said. "Everyone in your line misunderstands the door. That's the whole story, isn't it? 3 brothers on a bridge, and the 2 who wanted to command it and reopen it died of the wanting, and the one who understood you don't command a threshold, you keep it, lived and died well and handed it on. Your Cadmus's blood, the middle brother, the one who wanted to reopen what had closed and was destroyed by the wanting." Harry took a step forward, and Hermione stepped with him, the two of them moving as one thing, the way they had learned. "You've spent 50 years being the middle brother, tearing the door open over and over to drag yourself back through it, and every time you tore it, you didn't master death. You wounded the one structure that was keeping you and everyone and everything safe from what's on the other side. You're not the master of the door, Tom, you're the hole in it, and we're the keepers. And we are not going to open what we exist to hold shut, not for Sirius, not for the whole family behind those walls, not for anything, because the moment we open it you win and the world ends, and Sirius would rather die 100 times than be the reason we let that happen. And he's telling you so right now behind that gag, and you can't hear him, because you've never once in your whole torn life understood a person who'd rather be lost than let go of what they're keeping." The red eyes moved to Sirius, kneeling in the frost, and then back to Harry, and something in them recalculated. Then they moved to Hermione, and the high cold voice changed its tack entirely, because a mind that saw people only as levers was always searching for the softest one. "And you," Voldemort said, and the awful gentleness turned toward her like a lamp, "the muggle-born girl who reads, I know what you are better than you do. I was a poor orphan too, once, clever than everyone who despised me, and I know the particular hunger of the child who came from nowhere and had to earn every inch. They gave you 2 ancient houses and told you the blood was in you all along, and some buried part of you has never forgiven the accident of it, because it means the thing you're proudest of, the earning, was never quite as necessary as you needed it to be." He took a step, unhurried, over the frost. "I could give you something better than an inheritance you stumbled into. I could give you the one thing your whole striving life has wanted and never had, which is to be at last, indisputably, the most important person in any room. Open the door with me, and I will make you my equal in the ordering of death itself, and no one ever again will look at you and see a girl who came from nowhere. They will see what you truly are." Harry felt the words reach for the exact wound Hermione had confessed to him in an alley a lifetime ago, the one about the unearned, about a relief that had felt like something stolen in the Goblin's Hall, and he did not speak because this was hers to answer, and he trusted her to answer it. "You've read me almost perfectly," Hermione said, and her voice did not shake. "That's the frightening thing about you, that you get so close. Yes, I came from nowhere. Yes, I've spent my whole life earning what other people were given, and yes, there's a part of me that flinched when a bank told me it was in the blood all along." She lifted her chin, and the starlight caught the lady's ring. "But here's the one thing you got wrong, the thing you always get wrong, because you've only ever been one man alone, and you measure everyone by your own hunger. You think what I want is to be the most important person in the room. I don't. I stopped wanting that the night an old magic asked me whether I'd hold a door with someone, and I said yes and meant it. What I want isn't to be the most important person in any room, Tom. It's to be in the room with the person who matters most to me, holding something worth holding together. You can't offer me that. You've never had it. You tore up your own soul specifically so you'd never have to need anyone, and now you're standing alone in a churchyard offering me a throne, and you genuinely cannot understand why a girl who came from nowhere would rather have his hand than your crown." She almost smiled, and there was pity in it, which was worse for him than hatred. "That's why you're going to lose, not because we're stronger, because you're alone and we're not, and this door was built for 2. Voldemort's face went very still, and the lamp of his gentleness went out. "Then we will do this the other way," Voldemort said, and his gentleness did not change, which was the terrible thing, "and you will open the door yourselves and beg me to take it before the hour is out." He did not attack Harry, he attacked Sirius. The curse left his wand without a word, and Harry felt the keeping scream a warning and had no time to answer it, and it would have taken Sirius through the heart, except that Sirius Black had spent his whole life being faster than the people who wanted him dead, and he threw himself sideways in the frost with his hands still bound, and the curse struck the ancient grave instead and blew a wound in stone that had stood 800 years, and the churchyard came apart into light. After that it was chaos, and it was the kind of chaos Harry had trained for all his life without knowing it. The envoy moved, and Andromeda came over the churchyard wall to meet him, her mother's dueling robes flaring, and the two of them vanished into a duel among the leaning stones that Harry could spare no attention for. Remus was there suddenly, and Tonks cutting toward Sirius through the dark. And Voldemort turned the full weight of himself on the two keepers of the threshold, and the weight of him was enormous, 50 years of stolen power and torn soul and single-minded want, and it fell on them like a collapsing sky. They did not meet it as two duelists. They met it as one keeper with two wands, the way the garden had taught them, the way the whole long summer had shaped them, and it was not enough, not nearly, because he was too strong, and they had known he would be, and that had never been the plan. The plan was to hold. The plan was to survive his onslaught long enough to do the only thing that could end it. And so they gave ground together, backward through the leaning stones, shields overlapping, and Harry took the curses that came for Hermione, and Hermione turned the ones that came for Harry. And neither of them fell, because neither of them was fighting to win. They were fighting to still be standing together when the moment came. It was the hardest thing either of them had ever done, and the strangest, because everything Harry had ever learned about fighting told him to strike back, to find the opening, to end it, and everything the keeping had taught him told him to do the opposite, to give ground, to endure, to keep. Voldemort tore the churchyard apart around them. Stones older than the church cracked and flew. The frost turned to steam where his curses struck the ground. He was faster than anyone Harry had ever faced and stronger than the two of them together by a margin that should have finished it in seconds, and it did not finish it, because he was fighting to destroy and they were fighting only to remain, and remaining, it turned out, was a thing two joined keepers could do far past the point where any single duelist would have fallen. Harry felt curses graze him and did not fall. He felt Hermione take a glancing blow that spun her half around, and he was there, already there, his shield over her before the follow-up came, and she was up and steady again in the same breath, and neither of them broke the rhythm, because the rhythm was the whole of their strength, the two wands one keeper thing the garden had taught them, and the summer had perfected. Beyond the wall the outer battle was turning. Harry could feel it through the keeping, the order pushing Voldemort's forces back from the churchyard, the ring of protection closing, and he understood that all he and Hermione had to do was outlast the enemy's certainty that he could break them, and that the enemy's certainty, after 50 unbroken years, was beginning to fray. Sirius was free. Harry saw it at the edge of everything, Remus's knife through the shadow gag and Tonks's spell through the bindings, and Sirius came up out of the frost with a fallen attacker's wand in his hand and murder in his face, driving toward Voldemort's flank, and for one bright reckless instant it looked as though the Godfather's blind charge might do what the plan said could not be done. "Sirius, no," Hermione screamed over the roar of it. "You can't kill a wound with a wand, get clear." "Let us." Voldemort turned and struck Sirius from the air almost carelessly, a backhand blow of force that flung the last living black the length of the churchyard into the base of the U, and Sirius fell and did not immediately get up, and Harry felt the second heartbeat beside his own falter for the first time all night as Hermione's whole soul lunged toward the fallen man. And Voldemort, who understood people only as levers, saw the lunge and smiled his lipless smile, and turned his wand on Sirius where he lay stunned against the ancient tree, to finish it slowly where they could watch, because he had promised them ruin, and he was, above all the other terrible things he was, a keeper of his promises. "Open the door," he said, "or watch him die by inches. You have until I tire of his screaming. I have found over the years that I do not tire of it quickly." Here it was, then, the moment the whole plan had been built to survive too. Harry looked at Hermione, and Hermione looked at Harry, and Sirius lay stunned against the grave of the first keeper with a wand aimed at his heart, and every instinct in Harry's body howled to break, to run to him, to open the door, to trade the world for the man who had chosen him. And he felt the same howl in Hermione through the keeping, the same unbearable pull, and he understood that this was the true weapon. This was what the envoy had meant in the marble hall. This was grief brought to the ones who held the key, and that a lesser pair, a single keeper, anyone who had come to this churchyard alone, would have broken here and opened the door and lost everything to save one beloved life. But there had never once been two of them, and Voldemort did not know what that was worth. Because Harry did not have to hold the whole unbearable weight of that moment alone, and neither did Hermione, and that was the entire design of the keeping. That was why it had waited 800 years for a pair and not a hero. Harry held the part of himself that was breaking, and let Hermione hold the part that was still keeping, and she held the part of herself that was breaking, and let Harry hold the part that was still standing, and between them, sharing it, neither of them broke, because the load that would have shattered one was only just bearable to two who trusted each other enough to carry it in halves. They did not open the door. They looked at Sirius, and they loved him, and they did not open the door, and Harry sent one thought down the compass of the keeping to the man against the tree: "I'm sorry, hold on, trust us." And he felt, impossibly, an answer come back, not in words, in the shape of Sirius himself, which said, clear as a shout, "Don't you dare open it for me. Keep the door, that's an order." And Harry's eyes stung, and he did not open the door. Instead, together, they reached for it. They reached for the threshold the way they had on the night in the vault, all the way, standing in it, except this time they were not alone in the quiet with only the tired old structure to keep. This time the wound was here in the churchyard with them, the walking hole that was Voldemort, and as they reached into the threshold and took hold of it, together, willing keepers, they did the thing the keeping had been built for and had waited 8 centuries to do. They did not attack him. You cannot attack a hole. They held the door shut. They held it shut with everything they were, the two of them braced against it hand in hand, and they turned all the vast quiet attention of the keeping onto the wound that had been tearing at it for 50 years, and they kept. And the threshold held at last mended. It began where they stood and it ran outward, the way it had in the vault, the worn places firming and the thin places knitting, except now it reached the great tears, the scattered savage wounds, and it did not heal around them politely as it had before. It healed against them. It closed. 50 years of Voldemort tearing the door open had left 50 years of the door held open by him, propped on the pieces of his own torn soul, and now the door was being kept, truly kept, by 2 willing hands that would not let go, and a kept door closes, and it began, gently and enormously and without any cruelty at all, to close on everything that had been holding it open. Harry would try in the years after to describe what it was to stand inside that closing, and he would never find the words because there were no words, because language was a thing built in the lit room, and this was happening at the seam of the lit room and the dark one. It was not like winning a duel. It was like being present at the mending of the world. The threshold rose around the two of them, vast and patient and unspeakably old, and it was glad in the way that only something enormous and tired can be glad to be held at last, and it leaned its whole immeasurable weight into the hands that were holding it, and the hands did not buckle because there were 2 of them and they were joined, and between them they had exactly enough. The frostlit churchyard, the leaning stones, the yew, the wounded grave, the far-off guttering battle. All of it went very small and very dear and very far away, and what filled the world instead was the door, the whole quiet architecture of the door, coming home at last to true, closing itself along every torn seam like a wound that has finally been allowed to heal, like a held breath finally let go, like the last chord of something that has been playing unfinished under everything for 800 years, resolving at last into silence. And the 2 of them stood at the center of it, keeping, and did not let go of the door and did not let go of each other, and could no longer have told anyone, least of all themselves, where the one holding stopped and the other began. Voldemort felt it. The red eyes went wide, and for the first time the gentleness cracked, and under it at last was the thing that had been there all along, the pain he had called ambition for 50 years, and now it had nowhere left to hide. His wand fell from his hand, the curse aimed at Sirius guttered out, and Lord Voldemort, who had torn himself into pieces so that he would never have to pass through the last door, stood in a churchyard under cold, clean stars and felt the door he had spent his life propping open begin, at the hands of its true keepers, to shut. "Stop," he said, and it was not a command because he had no command left. "Stop, you do not know what you are doing. I will be." "We know exactly what we're doing," Hermione said, and her voice was steady and her face was wet and her hand was locked in Harry's. "We're not killing you, Tom. We couldn't if we tried. We're keepers, not killers. We're just closing the door, the one you spent 50 years refusing to walk through." The one Ignatus walked through on his own 2 feet, as an equal, because he understood the whole time that it isn't an ending, it's a threshold, and the only ones it destroys are the ones who spend their lives clawing to stay on the wrong side of it. Her grip tightened on Harry's. "You could have crossed it 50 years ago whole once like a person. You chose to tear yourself into pieces instead. And now there's nothing left to cross but the pieces, and they can't stay, because a kept door does not hold open for a wound, and there is no version of this where you rule the threshold. There was never going to be. Your brother learned it on this exact spot 800 years ago, and you never once listened." She did not look away from him, and there was no triumph in her, only a terrible, steady mercy. "Go, Tom, you've held the door open long enough. Let it close. We've got it now." And the door closed. It closed without violence, without blood, without any of the horror he had spent his life dealing to others, because the keeping was not cruel and its keepers were not cruel, and the threshold, mended, simply did what a threshold does. The wound that was Voldemort thinned and thinned, the pieces of him drawn at last toward the door he had fled, gently, inexorably, the way water finds the sea, and the high cold voice rose once, not in a scream but in something almost like a question, a 50-year-old question finally being answered, and then the churchyard was quiet, and the stars were very bright, and the ancient grave stood wounded but standing, and there was no one before it any more. Because the last of Cadmus's line had gone at last through the door that the youngest brother's heirs had opened for no one and closed, with infinite care, behind him. The churchyard was very quiet after that. The outer battle had stopped, its heart torn out of it the instant its master went through the door, and the surviving dark figures had scattered into the night, and one by one the members of the order came in over the low walls into a churchyard lit only by cold, clean stars, and stopped and stared because there was nothing to see, and that was the strangest thing of all. No body, no triumph, no smoking crater where a dark lord had made his last stand. Only two exhausted 17-year-olds standing hand in hand among the leaning stones before an ancient wounded grave, with tears drying on both their faces and no visible sign of what they had just done, because what they had just done had happened at the seam of the world where nothing casts a shadow. Dumbledore came last and slowest, and he did not ask what had happened, because the keeping was still faintly alight in the air around the two of them, and he could feel it. And Harry watched the oldest and greatest wizard he knew stand in a country churchyard and understand, all at once, that the war he had been fighting his whole life had ended not with a curse but with two children refusing at unbearable cost to let go of a door and of each other. He took off his hat, that was all. He stood among the stones with his hat in his hands, an old man at a graveside, and said nothing, and it was the most eloquent thing Harry ever saw him do. Sirius lived. That was the first thing, the thing Harry ran to before the churchyard had even finished going quiet, dropping to his knees in the frost beside the yew where his godfather lay, and Sirius was breathing, and Sirius was cursing weakly, magnificently, which was how Harry knew he would be all right, and Harry got an arm under him and held on and did not try to say anything, because there was nothing to say that his hands were not already saying better. "You didn't open it," Sirius croaked against his shoulder. "He had my heart under his wand, and you didn't open it. You told me not to," Harry said. "Behind the gag, I heard you. You couldn't possibly have heard me. I heard you anyway." Harry helped him sit up against the tree. "That's sort of the whole point of what we are now, your family, the Compass Finds family. I'm always going to hear you, you miserable old dog, whether you're behind a gag or a wall or the last door in the world. Get used to it." Sirius looked at him and then past him, to where Hermione was coming across the frostbright churchyard with Andromeda's arm around her and the envoy nowhere to be seen, fled or fallen. It would be days before they were sure, and to the order coming back over the walls as the outer battle guttered out with its heart torn from it, and to the ancient wounded grave under the yew. And he seemed to understand all at once the size of what these two had done in a country churchyard while the world slept a mile away and did not stir. "The world's never going to know," he said. "Is it, what happened here tonight, what you are, what you did?" "No," Hermione said, reaching them, going down in the frost on Sirius's other side and taking his bound-marked hands in hers and checking them because she could not help it, because caring was the shape her whole soul took. "And that's exactly right. Ignatus told us in the vault, the keeping isn't for the world's gratitude, it's for the world's good, and those aren't the same thing, and a keeper who forgets the difference becomes the thing we just closed the door on." She looked up, and the cold stars were reflected in her wet eyes, and she was, Harry thought, the most beautiful and formidable thing he had ever seen or ever would. "Tomorrow the papers will say Lord Voldemort was never quite as real as people feared, and the Ministry will take a quiet credit no one can check, and the world will go back to arguing about Quidditch and the price of Newt spleens. And a mile from here two people will wake up in a house full of light and mend their own glasses badly and keep the oldest door in the world, and no one will ever thank them, and that will be exactly, precisely right." The envoy was gone. They found the place among the leaning stones where he and Andromeda had fought, and found her mother's dueling robes scorched and her own composure returned, and her account of it grim and brief. That he had been very good, and that when the churchyard went quiet and his master went through the door, the strength had simply gone out of him mid-cast, as strength goes out of a servant when the thing he served is unmade, and that he had looked at her with his forgettable face and said, almost with relief, "Ah, so it is done. I did wonder all these years how it would feel to stop." And then he had walked out through the far gate into the dark and not been seen again, and Andromeda had let him go, because a man who lays down his wand mid-duel is not a man you strike, and because she had understood, watching him, that the envoy had been as much a thing his master owned as any of the rest of it, and that whatever he was walking into out there in the dark, it was the first free step he had taken in a very long time. As for the Malfoys, the tale that reached them in the following days was small and fitting. That Lucius had woken the morning after to find every quiet arrangement he had made unraveling at once, the allied houses drawing back from a man whose great patron had vanished in the night, the whispers already turning, and that he had done the only thing a survivor like Lucius ever does, which was to discover, loudly and immediately, that he had never really been committed to any of it, and to begin at once the long, expensive work of pretending he had been on the children's side all along. Harry found to his own surprise that he did not much care. A man who plays only the visible hand is punished in the end by the visible world, and the visible world was already doing it, and it required nothing of the keepers of the threshold at all. They took Sirius home to a kitchen full of people who had felt the churchyard go quiet and had not known, until the door opened and the three of them came through it whole, whether they would ever see them again. Molly Weasley made good on her threat and fed them until they could not move. Ron gripped Harry's shoulder and then, uncharacteristically, pulled him into a rough, one-armed embrace and muttered something about never doing anything that quietly terrifying again without at least sending word, and Harry promised he would try, and both of them knew it was a lie, and neither of them minded. Ginny looked at Harry and Hermione where they sat close together at the table, hands loosely joined without either of them noticing any more, and gave a single satisfied nod, as of a wager long since placed and now, at last, come good. Luna drifted to Hermione and told her seriously that she had known all along Hermione was descended from something very old, because people who correct your facts that gently are almost always guarding something, and Hermione, who a year ago would have argued, only laughed and hugged her. Ted Tonks, mending in a chair by the fire against every healer's advice, gripped Harry's hand with both of his and could not speak, and did not need to, and Andromeda stood behind her husband's chair with one hand on his shoulder and the other, at last, on Sirius's arm, the two remaining cousins of a broken house standing together in a warm kitchen a very long way from the cold house that had made them, and neither of them said a word about it. Because there was nothing to say that the standing together did not say better. Dumbledore came late, spent and grave and quietly changed, and stood in the doorway of the drawing-room looking at the two of them for a long moment, and then bowed once deeply as he had bowed before they left, and said only, "The door is kept." I have wanted to hear that sentence for 100 years, and I never dreamed it would be a girl who reads too much and a boy who mends his own glasses who let me hear it. Thank you. Go and be young, the both of you. You have earned a very great deal of being young. And he went, and Harry never in his life saw him again without that bow somewhere in his eyes. It was near dawn when Harry and Hermione went up at last to the roof, because the roof was where they went, because neither of them slept well and both of them slept better now. The city was gray and gold at the edges, the first light coming up over a world that did not know how close it had come and would never learn, and they sat with their backs against the chimney, and Harry took Hermione's hand, the one with the lady's ring, and she leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a long while neither of them said anything because they had learned this impossible year, exactly how much could pass between them in silence. Harry watched the light come up and thought about the shape the year had made. 12 months ago he had been holding a piece of cold toast in this same house's morning light, a boy with a dead family and a borrowed room and a name other people own the meaning of. Now the room was his and the house was his, and the oldest door in the world was his to keep, and none of it was the thing he found himself grateful for as the sun came up. The thing he was grateful for was sitting against his shoulder with her hair catching the light and her hand warm in his, and she had been there the whole way, in the Goblin Hall, in the cellar, in the vault, in the churchyard, at the base and the point of every sign the two of them had ever stood inside, and the enormous machinery of ancient blood and old magic had built itself around that one plain fact and never once managed to be larger than it. The houses were vast, the keeping was vast, she was more. He had suspected it for years and known it for a month, and it had, in a country churchyard at midnight, become the truest thing in a life full of true and terrible things, and he did not intend ever to let it become ordinary, no matter how many ordinary mornings he was lucky enough to spend proving it. 2 houses, Hermione said finally into the quiet as she had said it in an alley in Diagon a lifetime ago. 2 houses, Harry agreed, the oldest door in the world, that too. And a very great deal of being young, apparently, on doctor's orders. He felt her smile against his shoulder. I don't know how to be young, Harry. I've never once tried it. I went straight from being a child who read too much to being a keeper of the threshold. I think I may need help. Good thing you know someone, Harry said. He's not clever the way you're clever, but he's had a lot of practice being ordinary in extraordinary rooms, and he'd very much like to teach you if you'll have him, for as long as you'll have him, which he's hoping is quite a while. He turned his head and she lifted hers, and their foreheads met in the growing light. For the record, in spite of all the magic, the way I did on the roof last month and mean to keep doing until I'm as old as Dumbledore and twice as annoying. The record, she said, in spite of all the magic, and she kissed him in the first gray light of an ordinary morning on the roof of a house that no longer screamed, in a city that would never know what the two of them had kept from it, and below them the found family slept, and the 2 houses held, and the oldest door in the world stood quiet and mended and kept at last by 2 hands that would not let go of each other and never, from that morning to the far end of their long lives, once did. Chapter 7 End.